燃え上がれガンダム。
Hello and welcome to Weekly Suit Gundam, the special bonus podcast brought to you by the folks at the Weekly Stuff Podcast. I am Sean Chapman.
And I'm Jonathan Lack.
And we are here once again to dive into the wild and wacky world of Mobile Suit Gundam. This week on the show for the last time for a while, because we have reached the end of the Gundam track. They laid one more piece of track while we are doing our third-year anniversary stuff. Because we're going to talk about the cinematic adaptation of episode 15 of Mobile Suit Gundam, a thing when we started this podcast I never thought I would ever say. We're going to talk about the movie Cucuruz Doan's Island that came out in June 3rd in Japan, and obviously has sort of like trickled around the internet in different ways, and Blu-rays have been imported and things like that. But this is a brand new Gundam movie based on some very old Gundam.
Yep. I have the Blu-ray box set in front of me that is being sold. You have to be in Japan, you have to go to a Japanese movie theater, and you have to have a movie ticket to buy these. Or you can get them on eBay from people who bought them for you. So I spent... This is the most expensive episode of Weekly Suit Gundam, because I spent about $180 on this fucking box. Worth it. I'll tell you about it in a little bit. Both because I love the movie and because the box is really cool. The box itself, but what's in it is cool. So we will talk about that. But yeah, this is going to be the last Weekly Suit Gundam, not forever, but for a little while, because we are evolving this channel and platform into Japanimation Station, which you have hopefully heard about already. Do you want to tell the kids about that, Sean?
Yeah, so if you haven't finished listening to the end of last week's episode of Weekly Suit Gundam, which is when we sort of officially announced this, we are turning Weekly Suit Gundam effectively into Japanimation Station. Like, Weekly Suit Gundam will exist as an occasional, title effectively that we'll bring out when it's time to do more Gundam stuff. But we wanted to make sure that we could continue to talk about anime in the way that we've done on Weekly Suit Gundam. So we've made Japanimation Station, which will start August 1st. And it's the same basic format as Weekly Suit Gundam. It'll be the same kind of deep dive, contextualized, looking at the history and the behind the scenes stuff and all of that, and then picking kind of big topics and moving through it very thoroughly and holistically, in the same way that we've done with Gundam. We're not doing let's do an hour podcast on every single episode of a TV show, but really looking at the big picture stuff. And that kind of more thoroughly academic kind of approach that we do here. But the only difference between Weekly Suit Gundam and Japanimation Station is Japanimation Station can be about any anime stuff we want it to be about, including the first topic, which is going to be Full Metal Alchemist, starting with the original TV show adaptation from 2003, and then moving on to the Brotherhood stuff. So very, very excited. We've been hard at work on the behind-the-scenes stuff, kind of kicking into this new era or phase of the podcast that I think people really like.
Yeah, and I'll just tell people, the YouTube channel Weekly Suit Gundam will be turning into Japanimation Station, and my plan is to sort of make that switch over this coming Friday. That'll be Friday, July 22nd, and on that same day, you are going to get a very special preview where you are going to see the original theme song for Japanimation Station that we have made as a big group effort here with Sean, me, and my brother Thomas, who is a composer, and a friend of ours named Hatsune Miku. And you are going to get to see that and hear that theme song for the first time on Friday with a little conversation from us. There's already a trailer for Japanimation Station up. There's going to be another one with the theme song, and then the full show will start on August 1st. But that is why Weekly Suit Gundam, it'll come back for Witch from Mercury, and we've got the G-Reco movies, all sorts of stuff for Weekly Suit Gundam not dying or anything, but evolving as a sort of more regular thing into Japanimation Station. There you go.
Yeah, so again, if you like Weekly Suit Gundam, like we're just like continuing what this podcast is into Japanimation Station, and if you want to follow along with that and you haven't watched Full Metal Alchemist or you want to rewatch it, I would recommend starting now because it's a lot of anime to watch, because we're watching it behind the scenes, so we can get onto that as soon as we can once the podcast launches.
Yep, absolutely. So coming August 1st, but today, Sean, let's not get too far ahead of ourselves because we do have one last big piece of Gundam to talk about here, and it is such a treat, and it is such a pleasure to have this, I think, as like our little kind of like break moment, because this is the Cucuruz Doan's Island movie, directed by Yoshikazu Yasuhiko, the original character designer and animation supervisor of the original Gundam, come back around for what very much feels like watching the movie one last Gundam rodeo. And I guess we should start, not everyone has probably seen this movie yet. We'll have spoilers later on. But do you want to just give our quick spoiler-free impressions of the film?
Yeah. I think it's fantastic. It's like a weird movie in some way, just like conceptually it is a weird movie, right? I mean, obviously you need to be a Gundam fan, and specifically a fan of First Gundam, and ideally someone who has read the origin manga. Like that is like the ideal pathway to this movie. Obviously if you don't need to have done all of that, but you need to have a pretty, healthy familiarity with the characters in the world and all of that of original Gundam to get into Cucuruz Doan's Island, because it is what it kind of says on the box, which it is a movie version of like a bottle episode from the original show. And it's got, I think, so much of the same kind of heart and style and approach of classic Gundam. The kind of stuff you see if you read the origin manga, which adapts, the like all the adventures of White Base and Amuro and stuff, which is not really stuff you see in the stuff that they did for the OVAs, which is Char's backstory. But it has that kind of flair and energy to it. But it is also a like very, I think, reflective movie. It feels kind of like, in a weird way, it feels like a movie you can put into like next to a lot of the kind of retro revival stuff that we have these days, that we get a lot, particularly in live action, but also in anime. It is a movie I think you could very comfortably sit next to if they double feature with the fourth Evangelion movie, which I think shares a lot in common with this in terms of a lot of like the theme and style of it. But it feels like it's a lot of people, older people, looking back on their work and their history and telling a story like through a lot of those feelings. And I think it's extremely touching and effective while being a fairly small scale, like kind of humble movie. It's not, it doesn't have the biggest stakes in the world. They up the stakes more from what the original TV show is. But it is mostly a movie about Amuro hanging out on this island and learning the lessons he needs to learn from these kids and from Doan. And it's really great.
Yeah, I've seen the movie a couple of times now, and I think it's beautiful. I think it is, like, beautiful in its creation. It's a gorgeous animated movie. I think it's got the nicest backgrounds in any piece of Gundam. We can talk about that more later. But, character animation and everything is just gorgeous. It really, I think it captures Yasuhiko's style better than the origin OVA, which did a good job at that. I think this does a great job at it. And some of that is that he's more hands-on with this. He directed it. He did the storyboards. There's a lot of pieces he worked on that he wouldn't have done on the OVA directly. And then everything you said, I totally agree with. The connection with the fourth Eva movie is the first thing I tweeted when I saw this film, because it's pretty obvious, I think, when you see it. And it's as you say, it's humble and it's small, but it feels big and vast in the sense that it is these artists. And I would include like Tōru Furuya in that, as a voice actor, looking back on work that made their careers 40 some years ago and kind of saying goodbye to it. I have choked up at the end of this movie both times I've seen it, because the final scene, which involves the white base flying through the air, the way that is animated and composed and scored and edited feels like a farewell to Gundam in some way. It kind of feels like a team kind of saying, like, Gundam is continuing, obviously. We have Witch from Mercury coming in a couple months. But, like, First Gundam, at least, feels like there's a little bit of a letting go that is very lovely. And also, I think, dovetails nicely with where we're kind of putting it on the podcast right now. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, it's like, I think I had a fairly similar reaction to the end of it.
Yeah. Before we get into the movie, I did just want to say, the way this is being distributed, so it's out in Japan in theaters, well, it's probably left theaters by now, but it came out in Japan in theaters in June, and they did this with Hathaway last year as well, where they're just selling the Blu-ray in theaters, not as a general thing. You have to go to the movie theater and buy a ticket to the movie, and then they will let you buy the Blu-ray, and there's a standard Blu-ray, and then there is what I got, which is this giant fucking crazy box, which has an illustration on it by Tsukasa Kotobuki, who is one of the character designers on the film and animation leads. And then inside the box, you get a bunch of crazy shit. You get the movie itself with an original illustration by Yasuhiko as, like, the slip cover. So that's nice. It's a Blu-ray. It's a good Blu-ray. You get a bonus disc set with more original art by another one of the character designers that has a bonus disc. The bonus disc Blu-ray has the, like, this is a common thing you get on Japanese discs. You get the press conference, like, about the film with all the people talking about it. And then the entire script of the movie you can flip through on the Blu-ray and read the entire shooting script if you want to read that. Then there's also the original soundtrack CD. I was listening to that this morning to get ready for the podcast. There is a 16-page booklet in the Blu-ray. There is a, like, 40-page book that it comes with that is the key animation book, which is a real fucking treat. It's basically just big enlargements of keyframes from the movie that you can look at, like the drawings, and they're very beautiful, as you would imagine. And then the piece de resistance is a 600-page storyboard book, which is the entire storyboards for the film, as drawn primarily by Yoshikazu Yasuhiko. The other storyboard artist is Im Gahi. I've seen her name spelled a million different ways. She is a South Korean artist. In katakana, it's just Imu Gahi. I've seen it as Lim Gahi. I've seen it as Im Kahi. So I'm not entirely sure how to say it in, like, its proper Korean, but that's how it's spelled. And she is the assistant director on the movie. And I know it's a she just because I was listening to the audio commentary a little bit, and she's on there. So anyway, but yeah, the storyboard book, I actually spent some time this morning looking through it, and it's fun because it is mostly Yasuhiko drew it, and his, like, we talked about this with reviewing the manga that he did, the Gundam the Origin manga. He's so phenomenally good at drawing characters where you get so much of the character through just a little bit of line work. And even in the storyboards, which are fairly, like, sparse for storyboards from some of I've seen, you still get that throughout. You get, like, the entire Amuro performance just reading it. It's a lot of fun. So anyway, that is the crazy edition of this movie that I got just for posterity's sake. And I'm actually glad it was a stupid amount of money, but hey, I've done stupider things. Why not? It's fun.
It's a cool thing to get,
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like it is, like, worth it, if it's not just like, they didn't just jack up the price on a normal Blu-ray with a normal set of extras.
No.
Like, that's a pretty extravagant box set with a lot more in it than you would normally get. I mean, Japan is a lot more extravagant with a lot of its home video releases than you usually get over here, particularly these days. But that's exceptional even for the standards of what you would normally get buying a Blu-ray over there.
The thing that pushed me over the top is the storyboard book, because I actually collect these to begin with. I have a bunch of the Ghibli ones. I've gotten some pieces of these elsewhere, and I just love those. I think you can find really fun things going through them. I have a couple of little tidbits for this movie that I found reading through it. And, it's just a cool record of the production. And there will be a general on sale version of this at some point that you'll be able to get from Amazon Japan for cheaper. But if it's anything like Hathaway, it probably will not include all of this, because Hathaway in theaters, its big crazy extra is it gave you the Hathaway's Flash Book 1 and then an entire audiobook read by Ono Kensho of that book. And that was the thing they gave you with that one. And that did not go in the general on-sale edition that they did a few months later, which I have and is a nice edition, but wasn't that lavish. So I kind of wanted to get this now because, I actually use these in my research sometimes. So, all sorts of ways I can justify it. The main thing to justify it was I want it. But there you go. Yeah.
Yeah, very cool. I am both jealous and then also not, because I don't want to spend that amount of money, but I want to have it.
That's fine. But Sean, do you want to start with sort of whatever backstory we have to talk about this movie?
Yeah, like it's not a particularly elaborate story of how it came to production. And this is like I believe this is a first in Weekly Suit Gundam, where we are talking now about a thing that was announced, made, and released over the course of the podcast lifespan, to the point where we talked about it when it was announced.
Yes.
Because it was like that time when they announced like the Gundam Seed movie and a bunch of other projects. And this was one of those. And what they said at that announcement is kind of like basically what the main story is of this movie and its production, is that fundamentally it is made because Yoshikazu Yasuhiko wanted to make it. Basically, he did, the Origin manga, then he came back to direct and do work on the Origin OVAs, and after that he wanted to do one more project, and basically he saw the manga version of Cucuruz Doan's Island. If people don't know, I think we've mentioned it on the podcast when we did the Origin stuff. But basically, there is a manga version of Cucuruz Doan's Island that is not done by Yoshikazu Yasuhiko. It's done by a mangaka named... Oh, I had it pulled up and now I can't find it. It was done by another mangaka. I'll pull up the name. I'll find it in just a second. And he saw that manga and sort of was inspired by it to do a project. The mangaka is Ono Junji. That's who it is. That is done somewhat in the style of Origin. So he saw that manga and was kind of inspired by it. This is not an adaptation of that manga. I haven't read the manga, but he has said he didn't adapt it. It was more like it served as a source of inspiration for him to do his own version of Cucuruz Doan's Island. And so that spark of inspiration is what he took to Sunrise and said, hey, I want to do the movie. And they were like, rad, sure, like, let's do it, because they know Yoshikazu Yasuhiko has such a huge reputation, and the Origin and all that was so successful. That they're like, yeah, we'll let you do the movie. And I mean, the turnaround and everything on this movie was pretty quick overall, because it was only announced a couple of years ago. And yeah, I mean, that's most of the story. They got Tōru Furuya back, obviously, to play Amuro. They got Furukawa-san back to play Kai. Other than that, almost everybody is a recast, which is one of the things about it that feels like it's probably time to leave First Gundam behind, because it's like you've only got two actors from the original kind of left. I mean, obviously Yuji Keita makes a brief vocal cameo, but Char's not really in this story.
And the other characters, it is people who it's not all new recasts. Like Sayla is Megumi Hatan from the Origin, and you have Ken Narita playing Bright. He's done that for years. But yes, there's a lot of people who are replacing actors who have died or moved on with their careers. Only a couple of original voices here.
Yeah. And then like the rest of the production staff is mostly people who are from Origin. Like, it's a very broadly similar production team. The music is Takayuki Hattori, who did the music for Origin. The script was written by Toshizo Nemoto, who does not on Origin, but he has done a lot of other stuff. He did some of the scripts for Iron Blooded Orphans. He's just worked on like a shit ton of shows. Like, some of it is, a lot of it is stuff that I haven't seen, but he did like Log Horizon, which is a very good isekai show. He did a lot of scripts for Durarara, which is an amazing show and particularly well written. So yeah, it's like it's a lot of like Sunrise people they brought together, a lot of Origin people they brought together to do this kind of one last hurrah. And Yoshikazu Yasuhiko has said multiple times that this is his last, like, at least like last movie or anything he's going to do in the world of Gundam. I think he specifically used the word Eizo, which refers to video. So that technically what he said leaves open a gap that, like, if he wants to do a manga, it wouldn't be going against what he said. But this feels like it's him saying, like, this is me kind of putting my mark in my last mark and kind of walking away from Gundam. And Tōru Furuya has said in a lot of like the stuff leading up to this movie in the press that obviously he's going to continue to voice Amuro in the games and all that kind of stuff, which he has been doing continuously for like 40 years. But this is almost certainly going to be the last time he plays Amuro, especially like young Amuro, for a big animated project like this, because what other opportunity, I mean, you wouldn't have expected this to have happened in the first place. So what other opportunity would come around that would involve that? And so like my impression has been that Tōru Furuya was like pretty heavily involved in a lot of like the talks around Amuro and how he was used in the movie and all that kind of stuff as well. Just based on all the interviews I've read with him and Yoshikazu Yasuhiko in them together. And that's the stuff that makes this feel like it is that kind of like legacy sequel thing we get a lot these days, but in a very interesting way, because obviously while it is in a much older Tōru Furuya playing Amuro, Amuro is still just a 15-year-old boy in this film. And he is sometimes, in some ways, he's even more of a 15-year-old boy in this film than he was in the original TV show. So it is not, it's not a Top Gun Maverick thing or something like that, of where it is the character has aged on screen and you're reflecting on that, but the creators have aged and their perspective has aged and the style has changed and all of the rest of that, and your own, like everybody's relationship to Gundam turns this into this interesting sort of pseudo-legacy sequel alongside a lot of the other kinds of movies we get these days.
Well, then maybe that's a good transition into talking about the movie itself, because I think that's absolutely right. It is a weird thing, right? Like, and I think intentionally, the movie kind of lampshades its weirdness because it opens with that little text box that says, this film is a remake of the 15th episode of Mobile Suit Gundam, which aired in 1979. And it is and it isn't. It is this, because it's kind of funny. It takes some big pieces from that episode, which I did rewatch yesterday to refresh my memory on it, and it takes some of the key moments from that. It expands on a lot of it. It specifically is placed in the timeline of the Origin manga.
Yeah.
So if you've read the Origin manga, where this happens is right before the Odessa operation, which in the manga happens at the end of the entire Earth adventure, and after that they go into space. And Makuve is there for the whole Odessa Day thing and all of that. So that's where it is placed here. That also means that Ryu is dead at this point in the story. Ryu is probably the character from White Base who is in the episode most, besides Amuro. And then, of course, he is not in the movie. To kind of make up for that, we get Sleggar Law, who is here in the manga at this point, and they kind of beef up the roles of other characters like Kai and those people. We get a little more Sayla and Fraubo and stuff like that. And so it is like basically like an animated add-on to the Origin manga. But of course it is also heavily borrowing from the TV show and the original movies. The Hattori score works in a bunch of the classical music from, not classical music, the classic music from Mobile Suit Gundam in really stirring, beautiful ways. The animation harkens back to it in several key moments. You have Yasuhiko's character designs, which are revised from what they were in 1979, but it's all Yasuhiko, so it still obviously exudes that kind of feeling. It's a really interesting product, I think, in that way. And I love, despite all of that, for me at least, I got into it so easily. There's no, because I don't think it's trying to overthink what it is or its position. It really kind of lives in the moment of this story. And it is both the past and the future and the present. And time is just a very kind of weird but wonderful thing in this movie, because it is elegiac and reflective, but it is also forward-looking because it's smack dab in the middle of a story where Amuro's biggest character moments have yet to come,
Yeah, and it is interesting because, as you say, it is very easy to sort of, if you wanted to, fit this directly into the Origin manga and see it, like, where Amuro's character is broadly feels like it's like what you see in the Origin manga, because, again, that with how, like, things have been moved around, a lot of his biggest stuff hasn't happened yet, but you get direct references here to, like, Homecoming, right, and his mom and that kind of stuff, but this is pre-Ramba Ral for him. And so it's interesting, kind of, you can fit it into that Origin manga stuff, but I agree with you that it feels like the movie does enough work on its own that as long as you have a fundamental understanding of First Gundam, and you know these characters, and you know the events of all of that stuff, the specifics of that timeline aren't particularly important, because it all you need is that fundamental understanding, and then the movie gives you enough key clues immediately to place each character into the proper place of, like, okay, this is this version of Kai, or where he is at, this is where Amuro is at in his character development, this is where Bright is at in his character development. It lets you sort of place and center all those characters appropriately before you end up going off to the island.
Yeah. And, I think the central thing, I feel like the episode Cucuruz Doan's Island is this itch that has never fully been scratched for the people who made Gundam, right? And Tomino reacted to that episode by, like, disavowing it, right? And he has worked pretty hard to make sure it's never left the island nation of Japan. Of course it has, but not officially or legally, right? You know, kind of kept it at bay there. You know, when I was rewatching it yesterday, and we said this way back in, like, Weekly Suit Gundam episode 2 or 3 would have been when we talked about that episode, right? It's the worst episode of First Gundam, but it's not a bad episode of First Gundam. It has a lot of wonderful stuff in it, and I think the central idea of a Zeon officer who left the military to protect these kids whose parents he accidentally killed and has disavowed war, but will fight to protect these children, is a great idea for a story. That episode is just the one where you can feel the production crunch of First Gundam most clearly. When I rewatched it yesterday, I mean, Amuro is off-model in, like, every shot of that episode. The Gundam is basically never on model. Cucuruz Doan himself is a striking character design that looks goofy throughout because of how it's drawn. It's just an episode that feels like it didn't get finished, you know?
Yeah. I mean, so you, Jonathan, you shared with me some screenshots from your collection where there's, like, booklets or whatever that had some interviews and stuff, and one of them was a summary written of, like, basically, what the fuck is this movie? Like, what is a Cucuruz Doan? And it goes through a little bit of, like, the broad strokes of that production history. And, like, a big part of it is that for those kinds of bottle episodes, typically what they did is they outsourced the, like, actual animation side of it. In order to, like, be able to manage the production of it. So, like, they would get someone who was usually a more kind of junior member of, as, like, a director and a writer and stuff, and they would be kind of in charge of it, and then they would outsource the animation side of it to another studio, and Cucuruz Doan's Island is, like, just one of those episodes that's infamous for what they got back was not good, and there was nothing you could do about it at that point because it was like the timeline is too strict. You don't have, like, the time or money or anything to go back and, like, reanimate that episode, and it's like you just gotta air it. And it's like, well, shit, you know, that it is what it is. It's not the worst animated episode I've ever seen. Like, eventually, one day we'll do Super Dimension Fortress Macross, and we'll get to talk about the most disastrously poorly animated thing ever put on TV, which is an episode of Super Dimension Fortress Macross, for, like, a lot of, like, crazy production reasons. But anyways, like, so there's that happened a lot in this era where you were having, you know, shows that were trying to air a new episode every week for an entire year. Like, that's a crazy production thing that anime almost never even does these days. They've moved so far away from that model because of how unreasonable it is as a production design and, like, consideration. And yeah, Cucuruz Doan's Island is one of those where I think the core idea of it is solid, and it's a fun episode, and it's an exceptionally memorable episode. Everybody remembers Cucuruz Doan's Island because it's so different from everything else in Gundam. It's got such a distinctive premise, but it is just that, like, yeah, the actual result of the production is so kind of comical in places, in unintentional ways, that it kind of kills the thing. But because it is this really memorable thing, it feels both insane but also very appropriate that this is the thing that ends up getting a movie. You know, like, you can't imagine like Time Be Still, the one with all the time bombs that the Zeon soldiers put on the Gundam, which is an amazing episode, but that's not episode's not going to be turned into a movie. It doesn't have, like, the like broad, ambitious, like, scope of imagination that Cucuruz Doan's Island has to imagine this much bigger premise that it couldn't really execute on at the time.
Right.
So it feels right that this movie got made in some weird, fucking crazy way.
Well, because that's what I was going to say. When you watch it, what is so fascinating is there is something fundamentally unfinished about it. And I think part of it is that it opens up these ideas about, like, community during war, you know, what a soldier's duty is, what, like, you know, a separate, like, kind of vision for Amuro and his own life he sees in Doan. All these things are kind of opened up by that episode that it doesn't fully explore. That episode builds to a moment that is so fucking good that this movie does it verbatim, just a little bit better. And that is the final sort of big line of the movie from Amuro, which I feel like kind of feels like the reason this movie exists is to justify that line and, like, make a movie about it. And
that is, Jonathan, I'll say, that is exactly why this movie exists. That is what, in Yoshikazu Yasuhiko's interview from one of those screenshots you shared with me, that is what he says effectively, is like he was inspired by that moment, and especially he was inspired by the manga to have the idea for it. He looked back at the episode and saw that moment and was so struck by it and the complexity of the themes and the ideas presented by, like, is it right to have strength? What do you empower in, like, military might? What do you invite by having that? Like, what is the right thing to do here in this kind of complex scenario? And that is effectively why the movie was made, is because of he was so struck by that ending, which is why he kept it preserved almost identically. It's just like the context around it has been radically transformed.
Yeah. It's a we're going to talk about it later. It is a beautiful line of dialogue in Japanese especially, but even in translation. And it is haunting, and it is, I think, one of Tōru Furuya's best line readings of his fucking lifetime in this movie, which is a thing to say about an actor that good. But it's true, and I do think, like, you know, if Tomino's kind of way of dealing with this episode has been, we're going to pretend this thing doesn't exist, I think it's interesting that Yasuhiko has gone in the other direction and, like, seen this opening in it of, like, well, let's do it again. And let's bring out and I think it's you playing with ideas that I don't think they could have realized in 1979. I don't think they were probably because this fundamentally, Cucuruz Doan's Island, the movie, is an old man's movie. I feel like that in its bones. It feels like a older filmmaker or artist looking back at the world with older eyes. The same way I see, like, the last Evangelion movie for Anno, who isn't this old, but, older. I think Miyazaki Hayao's latest movie, The Wind Rises, and probably how his next movie will feel when that comes out. It's just that Isao Takahata's Tale of the Princess Kaguya, I think, there's a lot of similarities. Just there is something both, elegaic and wise and forward-looking and this weird mishmash of things that makes it very special.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's just talking about, like, diving into the meat of the movie. And honestly, I think the first thing I want to talk about is another tidbit I picked up from that interview you shared with me, Jonathan, where Yoshikazu Yasuhiko talks about, the question was basically, like, what is one of the things in the movie that, like, you're really proud of, that you want people to sort of, like, take note of. And he talked about, like, the island itself, and that being a thing that they really spent a lot of time and attention and care in presenting the island and the geography of the island, the life on that island, and all of that. And in that, I learned something that I had no idea about. I don't know if you knew this, Jonathan, that the island Allegranza that this is set on is a real island.
I actually hadn't looked that up. It makes sense because they do the same thing you get in the manga, where they really clearly place it geographically. They say it's the top island in the Canary Islands, and they, like, give you that in the movie. So yeah, you're showing me the Wikipedia page here, and it is near Las Palmas, which is where the movie starts. They show a military base there, and that's where the movie begins. So that's really cool.
And it's the thing that's crazy about it when you look at it is, like, the island. So if you watch the movie, it has the exact geography of what the actual island is, and including the big crazy crater on it, which is the thing that, like, I was like, I can't believe this island, like, and it's what Yoshikazu Yasuhiko says in the interview. He's like, we couldn't fucking believe that we found this island, that it is so perfect. Like, it doesn't look like it's supposed to really exist. It looks like it's supposed to be the set from, like, a big movie or something like this. And the crater itself is such a dramatic geographic feature, that then, like, imagining the Zeons putting a, like, missile silo underneath the crater and it opening up is such a fascinating idea. And the geography of the island is so fundamental to everything that happens, like the action on it. It's so considered how the geography plays into that. The distance of everything is, like, remarked upon and carefully, like, sort of examined. Amuro repeatedly is sort of, like, trying to orient himself, and I love that. Is such a cool way to show Amuro's sort of, like, intelligence, is he's able to use landmarks and close his eyes and thinks, okay, I saw that. Where did I see that before? From what angle? It's like, I saw an aerial view of this island, so where is this mountain? Where would I have fallen? And him trying to navigate the island by landmarks. There's just such thoughtful consideration of the geography and the space that the movie is set in. that it really feels like you feel like you have been to this island, which is why when I saw the actual picture of the island, my mind was blown, because it's like, I can't believe that place exists. Like, you could, I mean, it's a deserted island. I assume you could go there. I don't know how you would get there. But like it's weird to me that this is a place that you could actually go visit and be like, I'm on Cucuruz Doan's island. Even the lighthouse is like a real lighthouse, and all that stuff is like totally real.
It's the Punta Delgada lighthouse, which was built in 1861. I think it says here, 1861, and it was designated a historic monument in 2002. That's fucking crazy. I would not have, because I knew they had placed it in the Canary Islands and like the geography was real. I did not realize, Sean, that the fucking island is real, because it feels like it came out of the imagination, because it is so considered for the movie. And like, it is maybe a little passé to say this, but the island is a character. Like, the island is a character in the movie. The movie is called Cucuruz Doan's Island, and I feel like they took the island part of it very seriously to make that space real. You know, in the episode of the show, it's a nondescript island that you mostly just see the beach of, right? And in this movie, you go all over the island. You really learn the geography. You learn the landmarks. You learn about the land. You know, it's a plot point that, oh, there was a volcano here and there's ash under the soil and we can farm in it. And that's why we're using the hoe and we're like getting rid of the dirt, because then we're using the soil underneath that because it is viable. And just, that sense of place is so important to the movie. And it feels like kind of a culmination of a lot of the stuff in the origin manga, where something I love about that manga is its sense of place. Everything on Earth happens somewhere real. I think you and I both said the best use of that is that all the Garma stuff happens in Hollywood. You know, Garma is literally in the fucking Beverly Hills, and it's so silly, but it's so perfect for Garma and for the Zeons. But I think this is maybe the best use of just place that Yasuhiko has created in the entire Origin project, because the place is what's so important. It is literally about humans, you know, being, you know, in a relationship with the Earth and the space around them, and the significance and importance of that. You know, in this case, it's about the specifics of being in the middle of this war that has torn the fucking land apart, and there's this one little patch that is theirs and they are taking care of and they are living off of. But you know, it's obviously extends to, I think, apocalypse and drought and climate change and all sorts of things more generally.
Yes, it definitely has a like vaguely post-apocalyptic kind of quality to it, which First Gundam always has, right? Because this is a world in which half the Earth's population has been killed by the colony drop, and you know, climate change is imminent because of everything that's going on. And so this, I think, like really puts a kind of like fine point on it, even though it is set on like the actual island is fairly desolate, right? And so it's the island. It is not, that location has not been made post-apocalyptic, but it just sort of visually represents that feel, and that really dynamic, dramatic sort of contrast in the geography. I think one of the things that's so effective about it, of having this big kind of like plain area leading up to the beach where you have the lighthouse, and that kind of lighthouse beach area is where everybody lives, but you have this massive like ominous crater that looks over all of that, and underneath the surface of that is where the nuclear weapons are. Underneath the surface of that is where all the mobile suits have been hidden. That's like where Amuro has to go to get his Gundam back. It's such a good thematic use of space to sort of suggest, you know, like the psychic reality of what is happening here, and that these like kind of violent destructive things are being hidden and suppressed under the surface, and it's like bubbling up in the form of this ancient volcanic crater that is, no matter what you do, overshadows everything of like the lives of these children, even if they're totally ignorant of it. And just the raw visual symbolism of that is such an incredible use of geography and space in a movie, especially when it is not a use of geography or space that has just been invented, but has been borrowed by an actual real world location. It is like legitimately one of the best uses of geography I think I've ever seen in a film.
It's amazing. I mean, we talk about all the time. You know, last week we were reviewing Thor: Love and Thunder on the Weekly Stuff podcast, and like that movie's just holistic inability to ever build a convincing location that you exist in. But that is a broader problem that Marvel movies have and Hollywood generally just does terribly with. And, you know, animated movies on one level have a leg up on that because they have to invent it all, so more thought has to go into it. But, you know, you shouldn't take that for granted. It's still a crazy hard thing to do, and the fact that they realized it so fully here, because the bulk of this movie is just being on that island and exploring the space. It is Amuro learning about these kids. It is learning about sort of how they live. You know, there's the biggest, like, episode in the middle of the movie is fixing a pipe, is what a lot of this movie is about. There is some mobile suit action at the very beginning and the very end, but this is not a mobile suit heavy movie in any way. And so that is the main bulk of the film. It really is, you know, the closest analog I could give, and we mentioned it earlier, is the first half of the new Evangelion movie, the fourth new Evangelion movie, where the first half of that movie, if you haven't seen it, is about Shinji going back to this village with Ray and Asuka, and he is, and it's sort of this small village that has survived amidst the broader apocalypse that happens in the new Evangelion movies, and the people there are able to sort of eke out this nice little living amidst the destruction around them, and it's what they're able to do day by day, and Shinji is able to sort of come out of this depressive shell through that. To me, it's the best part of any Evangelion thing. It's just beautiful and stunning, and so key to that movie's entire project. And I think Cucuruz Doan's island is coming at it from a slightly different angle, in part that this island does not look like Edenic in the way the place in Evangelion is like very lush what has survived, and it is this like small little slice of Eden that they live in, but it is still very contingent. And it's that same idea, I think, in Cucuruz Doan, but it is that idea about sort of this self-sufficient small community sort of living in harmony with the land and what that has to teach the boy in the mobile suit who is scarred by war. I think they're beautiful companion pieces to one another, because I think Anno and Yoshikazu Yasuhiko have like similar ideas bubbling in their brains making these movies.
Yeah, of like the sort of crisis of modernity or whatever, of like the mini crises that life now is facing, and this, I think, instinct of going back to like the simple fundamental things of like your relationship to nature and the world around you, even when that nature is being destroyed, and having to kind of rediscover that relationship is obviously, it's like very key to both these movies. But as you say, they go about it in slightly different ways, where the Eva 4 appeals really to this kind of idyllic vision of the sort of agrarian Japanese village, that in like them planting rice fields and all that kind of stuff. And if you watch there's a whole kind of subgenre of anime that eventually we should be able to get to, some of them in Japanimation Station, that like really is fixated on agriculture and on that relationship and that classic Japanese relationship to the land and you know, Japanese style farming and all that kind of stuff. And that's really what Eva is looking at. And this is different because of like the setting and the world it's in, is that this island is not, as you say, it is not a place that you would look at and think this is somewhere where you're going to go farm. And that's kind of like part of the point of their farm, is that like it is hard. It is like a hard thing that they're trying to do. But if you work at it, there is something there that you can grow out of, and it's that volcanic soil that you just have to like break through the surface to get to. Like that, there is something more kind of grounded about the approach that I think Cucuruz Doan's island has, which is not saying one or the other is better, but the perspective feels appropriate, where Eva is more sort of like exaggerated in the way that it's approaching that, whereas like Gundam feels it's like much more harsh and realistic, and what is looking at of like, this is the kind, you're not going to have like your perfect little fucking fields in the world that Amuro lives in, but you can find ways to make it work anyways.
Yeah, I mean, Evangelion is more exaggerated in every conceivable fashion than Gundam, right? So it makes sense that it would be. Gundam has this kind of hard-nosed realism to it, and so it makes sense that, you know, Cucuruz Doan has not made an Eden for these kids, but he's made a little oasis. You know, he's made a little, you know, sort of like safe communal space where they are able not just to live, but to live together and kind of thrive through purpose, you know?
Yeah.
And all of those things I think are important as well. And it is very much, it's an alternate vision to, you know, the forces of war that Doan cannot, he can't go out there and end the war. He can't go out there and save lives that way. So he's doing this one good thing he can do. And that also just, feels more and more like this is a movie for the moment, where it just, you wake up to the news every day, and it's particularly bad in America right now, but there's shit going on all over the world,
Yeah, I mean, hey, in Japan, they just had the most powerful person in the country was assassinated, so that's a unstable scenario,
Exactly, and it's big things that you cannot individually fix, right? If you are in the United States and you are upset about the Supreme Court decision that overturned Roe v. Wade and took away abortion rights, it's so frustrating because the people who have the power aren't doing anything with it. And you as a random voter, well, you can vote and it's important to vote, but that alone will not fix anything, right? But there is, because of that, you do see movements back towards, well, what can meaningfully be done on an individual level? And I think that's a kind of interesting dichotomy going on in this movie, because Amuro is the character who carries the weight of the world on his shoulders, right? Yeah. As the boy in the Gundam, and who we know will go on in his future to affect the world in very big ways. He is the person who can kind of end this war to some degree, right? Him and Char together, off in their future, are going to do the things that ultimately wind down this war. Doan has gone in the exact opposite direction of Amuro, and that's what makes him so fascinating to him. And I think what makes that episode in Original Gundam so fascinating, even if that episode never fully explores it, is the idea of the person who says, I'm taking the off-ramp from all of this, and I'm doing what little good in the world I can do. And there's something about that is just extraordinarily potent, and I think is like with time and age has only gotten more potent, and is what makes this movie feel very, as nostalgic and elegiac as it is, very of the moment.
Yeah, and it's what all that, how that all reflects on Amuro, right? I think this movie is both like very happy. It's got this very happy energy to it because it's a bunch of like laughing kids and they're with their goat and milking the goat, and there's a like a PBS quality to some of it, not in a negative way, in a good way, of like, oh yeah, it's like today we're learning how to milk the goat, and today we're learning how to farm, and everyone's happy and smiling. It's
the joke we've always made that Cucuruz Doan's Island sounds like it's the educational show where you can like come to Cucuruz Doan's Island. It's like Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and he's going to tell you all sorts of like fun things about, today we're going to learn about agriculture, kids. And there is actually a little bit of that. I love this sequence where he teaches them how to properly milk the goat, and it is this loving piece of animation that like feels like it's out of an Isao Takahata movie. This is the kind of thing like in any kind of Takahata movie about agriculture, like Only Yesterday or Kagehime, something like that, you would get the scene where you go really in depth on this. And in this he shows like you have to do one finger at a time, and it's this just beautiful piece of key animation that like I looked at. It's like in the storyboards, it's also very lovingly done of how we're going to do this and show how to actually milk the teat of the goat. And yeah, there's a joy in that, right? There's a real joy in like learning how to live with the goat and take care of it because it is cool and gives you meaning and purpose.
Yeah. But at the same time, there is always this very sorrowful quality to the movie also, which is Amuro, who is an outsider. And even when he is able to sort of ingratiate himself into the community and he's able to sort of see the value of it and come and establish like a relationship with the rest of the kids and everything, and Doan himself, Amuro is ultimately an outsider, and he ultimately has to leave, and he ultimately has to go on the future of this war, and and he has to carry the burden of the war with him forward in the future. And I think that to me is like one of the fundamental things about the movie. And again, it's something that we talk about. The island is in the contrast of the island, is that it's like it is both sort of like peaceful and happy, but it is also so heavy in its sort of sorrow, and it's kind of grim in some ways because of how that happiness gives that really sharp contrast to when the violence happens, or to when Amuro, like you see that Amuro can't really be a Doan, at least not yet in where he is in his life, and we know he's never really gets to be a Cucuruz Doan. That contrast is always there and always kind of front of mind for the movie in many ways, which is, I think, for me, the thing that makes it so powerful and so effective, is because it's very thoughtful about how Amuro reacts to and works within those existing themes and contrasts them so perfectly.
Let's talk about Amuro then, because I think this is the thing that surprised me most about this movie. You know, if you had told me this movie is going to make beautiful use of geography, and it's going to do a great job with the kids and with Doan as a character, and it's going to have really lush, beautiful animation and great music and all these things, I would have said, yeah, that sounds like something we would get out of a Yasuhiko-directed Gundam movie, totally. But then if you told me, well, the weakness of this movie is that it has trouble finding an arc for Amuro because it's in the middle of the story, I would have also believed that. Like, that would have been kind of my expectation, is that, well, it's a sort of like, it's a sub-story that you're slotting into the existing story. How do we find an actual sort of arc or journey or something significant to do with Amuro, who is one of the most well-known and, like, well-covered characters in anime history? What more can we do with him, particularly in the middle of this, you know, story? And I do think maybe the most surprising thing about it is that I think it finds something very beautiful and soulful to do with that character, and to reflect on a lot of the fundamental things we know about him, and build up to that moment that we talked about, the big line at the end that he says to Doan, and make it feel like it's some kind of breakthrough for him, but also some kind of acceptance, and it is both beautiful and sad, and it's all these things mixed together.
Yeah, because I do think the movie hits on the right wavelength for First Gundam Amuro in particular. That is, I think, an understated quality of that series, but is fundamental to Amuro's character, which is that, like, him being the Gundam boy is a tragedy, and that he has so much potential to be something so much better than a soldier, but he cannot find a way to get out of that, you know? And that's, like, the fundamental, I think, element of that character, and what sort of, like, redefines the notion of what a protagonist to a mecha show can be, is that sense of tragedy to him. It is why I think it is, like, really important that he is the person who created Haro, because it is a tangible thing that you can see. This is the other path that Amuro could walk with all the incredible talent he has. And Cucuruz Doan's Island, the movie, really captures that feeling, and really makes him feel, as I said, kind of at the top of the discussion, more of a kid than I think he even felt like in the original series, even though he's played by, like, a 60-year-old plus man at this point, which you wouldn't ever really notice, you know, unless you kind of knew ahead of time that how old the voice actor is.
It's the miracle of anime, is that you can pull this off, right?
Yeah. But the perspective on Amuro is he's, like, awkward, and he's kind of, like, weak, and he's sort of, like, weirdly uncoordinated in some ways, but he's such a sharp, fast learner that, like, once he decides to sort of approach a problem, he is going to find a way to solve that problem. And that you see him grow so much, so quickly over the course of his time on this island, to, like, the jealousy of the other, the kid voiced by Uchida Yuma in this movie, the largest kid in the group, who's sort of like Amuro's foil or whatever, that then they become friends by the end.
Marcos,
Yeah, Marcos. That dynamic is so distinctly Amuro, and I think it is zeroed in on in this movie in a way that is more sort of, like, refined than it ever was in the original show, partially because the original show didn't have a 90-minute movie to kind of tackle that specific element of the character, and had a lot of other plates to spin in what it was doing. But Amuro is very, very much the protagonist of this movie. Like, it is about him. It is, you know, Cucuruz Doan is, like, a secondary protagonist for sure, but this is Amuro's film. And I was very happy to see how sort of thoughtful they approached him, and really willing to make him kind of this, like, awkward, bumbling kid for a lot of the movie, until he is able to sort of become a hero. But even in the ways that he becomes a hero is extremely sad, because it is him having to resort to violence and killing people, and being the Gundam pilot again. That dynamic and that contrast and everything they do with the character along that journey, I think is perfect.
Absolutely. I think, you know, seeing him resist Cucuruz Doan in the island at first, because he keeps going out looking for the Gundam and all of that, and Doan keeps giving him sort of olive branches, right? Of like, he is not punishing this kid, he's not locking him up, he's like trying to quiet the other kids down when they're mad at Amuro. When Amuro wants to go out again, he gives him the hat to like help him from heat stroke, and he gives him the canteen for water and all of this stuff, and just realizes like he is not meeting this kid with violence, he's giving him an like clearly Doan wants Amuro to stay on this island. It's like another kid he can save, right? And when Amuro starts to kind of warm to that, he flourishes, right? Like, he's not good with the hoe at first because he's a lanky, kind of weird kid whose strength isn't in that department. But he gets through it, and as soon as he sees the soil underneath, he realizes what Doan is doing, and Doan is very impressed by that. He, like, notices that right off the bat, that this kid gets it. And then, of course, there's the entire adventure with the broken pipe, where you see all of the best of Amuro going to a very different purpose. It's like, instead of killing with the Gundam, it's literally giving life. It is like connecting to the source of life, which is water, right? And he is able to get down in that same way. Like, him being a kid is part of what makes him a good Gundam pilot, because he's young and has instincts and all of this stuff, right? In that case, it is because he is young and he is smaller and he is lanky, he's able to get through this hole and be able to fix the pipe. And it is this vision of like an alternate universe version of Amuro, where his role in this war is not piloting the Gundam, it is doing something like this that is like life-giving and affirmational. And ultimately that is not where he's able to go. He doesn't stay on this island with them. He does get back in the Gundam. And when he gets back in the Gundam at the end of the movie, in some ways it's heroic, and in some ways it's just brutally tragic. There is, I think, one of the most striking scenes in the movie is when he kills the two soldiers. The first one he does with the trick that he's very good at this point in the series of, you know, lighting up the laser beam right in front of the cockpit and melting the pilot. And then he uses the Gundam to step on the other one. And there's this shot of Amuro close up in the cockpit of just weeping a little bit at this. It's a beautiful shot. It's one that he devoted a lot of, Yasuhiko devoted a lot of panels in the storyboard to depicting, because it's clearly an important moment to show, you know, Amuro having pain, not just at doing this, but like being back in the role of doing this, because he has seen something else. And then he goes out and does his hero shit. But, you know, I think the thing about the climax of the movie is that he is giving Doan what he can't give himself. And it's only through seeing this other path that he's able to have that moment. And it's incredibly sad. And it's like I said, I think it's a lot of emotions mixed in, because it's also beautiful. But, you know, yeah, I think the tragedy of Amuro is very deeply felt in this movie.
Yeah, like, it's just, you know, I think the fundamental thing for him as a character is, like, you have to simultaneously hold these two contradictory things in the viewer at the same time, which is you want to see him kick ass in the Gundam, right? You want to see him be a hero. You want to see him save the day. You want to see him fight, you know, Char or whoever is in Prevail. And also, you want him to get as far away from the fucking Gundam as possible. You want him to just bail, get out, jump out of get a fucking parachute or some shit, jump off the white base and go somewhere else. And it's like you both need to be desperately holding both of those things at the same time. And that's one of those things about the climax of the movie, is that it kind of weaponizes that dynamic very directly, because it's so stark. You're given such a clear alternative for Amuro, which is to leave all this shit behind and stay on this island, or you know, if he doesn't want to stay on this island, he can go get a bunch of war orphans and find another island and name it Amuro Ray's Island and have his own movie. So it's like you see that he could do that, but of course, also, if he did do that, this island would be destroyed. That all of what is here would be lost, because there's nobody else that can fight this fight. And you know, Doan is able to beat Amuro at the beginning of this movie because he got the fucking jump on him. But once Amuro is in an advantageous position against any enemy in this movie, he dispatches of them easily. Like, it's fairly trivial, which is something that I think is, like, both very appropriate for where he is at in the story, and is also one of the things that's, like, tragic, is this, like, God, he's so good at it. He's such an effective warrior, even if he doesn't want to be.
Yeah. Again, It's the frustration whenever I hear anyone say, yeah, the special thing about EVA is that it deconstructs the mecha genre, and for the first time ever, it has a boy who doesn't want to get in the robot. And it's like, shut the fuck up. You don't know. Hideaki Anno himself would tell you to shut the fuck up, because that's not what that show is doing in that sense. Or whatever is special about EVA, it's not that. That's not the thing it came up with. That's Gundam, and no one has ever done it better than Amuro in First Gundam. That dynamic of the hero and the necessary hero to a certain degree. It's not saying that Zeon doesn't need to just, Mobile Suit Gundam never does a both sides are equally bad, just to fuck off with the war entirely. It has a very clear point of view on who needs to fall here, even if the other side is wildly imperfect too. But there is that tragedy of the other life that Amuro didn't live. In a lot of ways, this movie is a very clear companion piece to Coming Home, the best episode of First Gundam, or at least the most powerful one in a lot of ways, which it directly recaps here, because we have that flashback dream sequence where he remembers his mom saying these things to him. I think it's kind of funny, there's several points in this movie where they build in space for Tōru Furuya to just say the most famous lines from Gundam again. Like, there's that, Bright has a flashback to the slapping scene, so you get all of those. But, it very much is the other side of Coming Home. It is the, person Amuro could be in a community if he didn't have the white base calling him over here, right? Yeah.
I do want to shine a little bit more of like a specific spotlight on some of the stuff that Tōru Furuya is doing, because it is insanely impressive. Like, it's a thing where it's like very easy to take for granted how good he is as Amuro, but honestly, it was like particularly, it was the scene where he redoes the like Nidoto Butana, like you slapped me twice. The way he plays that this time around feels so much younger. Like it's his voice cracks. He's so much more desperate. Like it sounds like a teenage kid who has just been like slapped repeatedly by a father figure. Like it's a really powerful, like strong delivery of that line that's fairly different from the original. And it's just like, it's interesting to me that Tōru Furuya, who is now 68 years old,
Jesus Christ,
is able to do that and evoke that like almost more effectively. This is something he's talked about in some interviews I saw about this movie, was him looking back at the original episode and some of like the stuff he did in the original Gundam. And obviously he's continued to play young Amuro throughout like he does it every year, because there's a McDonald's thing commercial that he'll come back for, or there's a video game where he comes and does some lines and all that kind of stuff. But really he like tried to like really like sort of get back to basics and kind of reassess it, and feeling like when he was young, because he was in his early 20s when he originally played Amuro, he tried to sort of make Amuro a bit more of an adult and like get a little bit more like kind of that heroic stuff in it. But now that he's so much older, he can't look at Amuro other than as anything but a little kid, because that age gap is so much more severe, that someone, once you're like an adult, a 15-year-old is just a child to you. And that is a lot of what he's bringing to the performance, which I think is really appropriate for how the character is written, and the whole perspective of the production feels in line with that. All of the people who worked on Gundam were relatively young men when they worked on Gundam and Mobile Suit Gundam. They weren't people who had been in the industry for 40, 50 years at that point.
The industry hadn't existed for 40 or 50 years.
Exactly. So it's like their life perspective was, relatively speaking, much closer to Amuro than anybody who has been in it, has been for the full length of the franchise, making a new Gundam thing today. And I think you see some of that in like, I think that's some of what changes when you get like Turn A Gundam and G-Reco with like modern Tomino, and how his perspective, I think, shifts partially with like, as that age gap greatens and your relationship to children fundamentally changes as you get older. And I think you feel that so much in Tōru Furuya's performance, and it's amazing to me. Like, it's one of the most incredible fucking vocal performances I've ever heard. If you're looking at like what is being demanded of the actor, it's like, you are 68 years old, play this 15-year-old boy and make him feel more like a 15-year-old boy when you played him when you were like 23.
Yeah, it's incredible. And like, I think you're right about that, you know, the famous line about, you know, you slapped me twice, not even my father slapped me twice. There's an indignance to it in First Gundam. There's a desperation to it here,
yes.
right? And there's a lot of like those kinds of moments. And it's just, yeah, the quality of his voice. You would not guess that this is a 68-year-old guy unless you know who Tōru Furuya is. You know, he's just very good at... Because I've heard him talk using his normal voice. He doesn't sound like this anymore.
No,
you know,
yeah.
He was putting it on when he was 23 also, obviously, right? And it is amazing that he can tap into that. I think it speaks also to how well written the movie it is, you know, how well performed the character is by the animators also. You know, like it's something, this movie just in its character animation. I think part of this is just that, you know, Yasuhiko is involved at every stage for this movie. He is the main director. In the origin he was like the general director, but then there was someone else who did sort of the day-to-day animation direction, right? So Yasuhiko here is the director. He did the storyboards. He's credited as character designer, which he would have to be credited as anyway because he designed all these characters. But you know what I mean.
Yeah.
He's on it like every step of the way. And I think there is, if you've read the origin manga, and that manga is just so good at getting into the heads of characters with a single drawing and a fairly simple drawing, because Yasuhiko's drawings are not that complicated, you know? There's a lot of that in this movie of like, I think you particularly get it with Amuro, but I think you get it with everyone. I think Bright is phenomenally done in this movie. We'll have to talk about him, but like on the level of animation and writing and voice acting and everything, but just basically any character you meet in the movie, it's just incredible performances of the animation itself, which is always something, you know, you never want to forget about. The animators are acting through the characters too.
Yeah, like everybody involved in the process of constructing the characters is at the top of their game. And if you want to talk about like the age thing, this is one of the things about the movie, and I knew this going in, and it's just like fucking crazy when you think about it. And it's one of those things that makes voice acting fucking incredible. Is Cucuruz Doan is voiced by a voice actor named Takeuchi Shunsuke, who, Jonathan, was born in 1997.
I looked this up.
5 years younger than us.
I looked this up earlier. He's 24 years old, and I thought when I saw that, I'm like, I must have the wrong Takeuchi Shunsuke. Like, is there another person named that? Because it's crazy to me. I would not have guessed that this Cucuruz Doan is voiced by a fucking kid, but he is.
No, yeah, because Takeuchi Shunsuke is a relative newcomer, but he's been in a lot of stuff. And he has because I've heard him in other things, and he has an extremely deep voice. So like, it's funny to me that like, even though again he's 5 years younger than we are, he always voices like older adult men. Or it's like a really intense, if I look at like some of his characters, looks like it's like the really intense dude in a sports anime, that kind of thing. But it's just one of those things that's like, you know, voice acting is a crazy magic trick because you would never think that he's that young. Because obviously he's a very talented actor. So he's able to play a character much older than him. But the mental image, and you would see it when you saw interviews. You would see Tōru Furuya as Shusuke Takeuchi and like Yoshikazu Yasuhiko and Furukawa Toshio, who plays Kai Shiden and has always played Kai Shiden. You'd see them all together, and it's like really weird. It's like a really mind-bending image. That it's like, okay, here's two people who are like 68, and I think Furukawa Toshio, I believe, is over 70 years old at this point. Who are playing like 15, 16-year-old kids, and then here's this 25-year-old young gentleman who is voicing like the 30-something-year-old Cucuruz Doan, and it's just like, man, those recording sessions must have been like weird. As soon as you stop and like you hit like, okay, cut, like we got what we needed. I like, you know, the difference in like, especially in like the Japanese very formal, you know, construction of like your senpai and like someone who's like, oh, you know, Tōru Furuya is like at the top of the fucking food chain in terms of like voice actors in the industry, and Takeuchi Shunsuke, like, you know, he's not at the very bottom, but he's still extremely junior. Like that must just be so weird as soon as you hit cut, and it's like that relationship has to do a complete 180 in your like actual social interactions. Like it's just it has got to be the most dramatic scenario like that I think I've seen in an anime, with just how extreme that difference is.
It's very funny, you know, but I think this is actually something that extends beyond voice acting in Japan, because this is, if you just look at Japanese cinema, there's always been a certain element of like, especially for men, playing older than their age, or not younger in the other way, because that's harder in live action,
yes.
right? but like the playing up, like Chishu Ryu, who was Yasujiro Ozu's leading man, you know, he played old fathers on the verge of death for his whole career, starting in his like 30s, which is hilarious when you go back and like in Tokyo Story or Late Spring, he's not that much older than Setsuko Hara, but he's playing her much older father. You know, Tatsuya Nakadai in stuff like Ron, just playing way, way above his age. Like, that's always been a certain willingness in Japanese cinema that I don't think generally exists in American cinema, where something like Orson Welles playing old Citizen Kane is a very much an outlier, right? But I do think that, you know, you get that carryover into animation a little bit, but of course then in animation it can go the other way around. Yeah. By the way, just for a second, he's not in the movie like a ton, but we gotta talk about Kai. And that not Tōru Furuya, that's Amuro, but why am I forgetting?
Furukawa Toshio?
Yeah, Furukawa Toshio. Sorry, for a second, I somehow forgot the name of one of my favorite actors ever. But yeah, Furukawa is fucking amazing in this. He is having the time of his life. It's just him having fun with the character, and he's still, like, you can hear the age. He's older, obviously. He has to pull a little harder to do Kai's voice, but he's just fantastic. It's so fun. I love it.
Yes. Yeah, it's delightful that, like, he's still playing the role and everything, and it's like with Tōru Furuya, like, it doesn't feel weird. It doesn't feel like, oh my god, like, you got this old man to play this dude, this like young kid. It's totally seamless. Yeah, it is. Like, it's not like Kai is in the movie a huge amount, but it feels like they gave Kai more to do in the movie because they knew they had Furukawa to come in and do the voice for him. And so it feels like he is definitely, you know, compared to like Hayato. And even like in like Slugger, he has and Job John, who Job John has some good screen time in this movie. I was happy to see Job John, you know, get some stuff to do. But of the other characters, you know, Bright and Kai are definitely the ones who are like the most prominent in this movie.
Yeah, and I love it. When we did on our part 3 of our anniversary, where we did all the crazy lists, including our top 10 vocal performances, I did have Furukawa slot in there at number 10 for me as Kai. And I will say I had seen this movie by then, and it did influence that, because it's just like, man, it's such a fun performance. You know, this is not Kai at his most dramatic, which we see elsewhere in Gundam, and he's great at that too. But it is, you know, it's great, and he's having a big summer because also the new Dragon Ball movie is very Piccolo focused, and I'm so excited to see that, because he has not had enough chances to do Piccolo lately, even in Super and stuff. Piccolo isn't in it enough, so.
Yes, so it is the summer of Furukawa Toshio. Yeah, and what a good summer that is.
Yeah, I was going to say, I actually don't know if there's any point in Dragon Ball where I'm satisfied with the amount of Piccolo. I always want more Piccolo, because Piccolo's just a great character, which is probably a good thing that they never give me too much, but yes, I always want more Piccolo.
I mean, there is a reason why, like, every Dragon Ball movie had to have the big Piccolo comes in and saves the day moment. It's like became a meme, effectively, is because everybody loves Piccolo.
They made it a meme because they do the joke in movie 10 with Krillin coming in and pretending to be Piccolo, which is fucking great. Anyway, we're getting off topic. We'll do a Dragon Ball podcast in a couple weeks when Superhero comes out, so look forward to that. But yes, love him. But let's go back to talking about Cucuruz Doan himself, because it's, you know, it makes sense that they I was going to say recast. I don't know if you can even say recast because it's effectively a new character, right?
Yeah.
But it is funny. This is, you know, someone obviously who was not born for almost 20 years after the Cucuruz Doan episode aired. But I think it's such an effective characterization. And one thing I find striking is that they actually, in the movie, give less formal exposition about him than the episode does. Like, the movie has the extra, you know, this thing about the Southern Cross Brigade that he was with. But in terms of Doan himself, there's one brief flashback, which I was actually interested to learn is cut down from how it was storyboarded. If you look in the storyboards that I have here, there are more panels about it that are, because there's a bunch of them through the book where you find panels that have an X through them because they cut this shot from the movie at some point. But not only do they have that, but there's a couple of sort of pages missing. They had a bigger flashback for him at some point, and they made it more, I think, intentionally vestigial. And they don't have him at any point in the movie, like, turn to Amuro or someone and explain his motivations or past, which is in the episode. There are lines where Doan says, like, you know, I accidentally killed these children's parents and now I feel responsible. They choose not to do any of that, and he's a man who just is fully living for the present of what he is accomplishing, and he tends to be very quiet and solitary. There's a lot of scenes of him once the kids are all down for the night, he just keeps working. And there's this, I think it is in the character performance of the animation, and then when we hear the voice, he has this intense guilt that he does not voice, but he has put into his entire life's work to the point that he is working himself, ragged for it.
Yeah, I think it was a really smart choice to keep him as a fairly aloof or distant character from the audience's POV, because you mentioned earlier with like the actor playing older thing, Citizen Kane, and this feels a lot like that in the sense of, it's the kind of thing where the movie is named after a character that is not necessarily the main character, or is not the like perspective character, and the part of like the point of the movie is, and actually Char's counterattack is a very good example of this, to keep it in the Gundam family, where it's like part of the point of it is to sort of examine the character and from the outside without access to their interiority much, and to try to determine like, who are you? Why are you doing this? And a lot of it is also that it is Amuro trying to figure that out. Amuro clearly is confused by and doesn't really know how to respond to Doan and like what to do in this scenario, because it's fucking weird. It is confusing. And I think that that's a really effective narrative move, is to maintain that mystery and allow it, like, leave it up to the audience to sort of determine how deep this goes and how much of this is like, he doesn't say explicitly, I have, these are all orphans of my own making, effectively, that I went and killed them, but it's like implied. And I think it's better to leave it in that territory and let the audience sort of engage with that question of this more mysterious character, rather than just sort of hand that exposition to you on a silver platter and say, this is just what Doan is, and move on with it, because it means that you are with Amuro trying to sort of piece out what the fuck this dude's whole deal is throughout the movie.
And I like that it's never said. It's never... Yeah. Doan says it. It's never Amuro says it to him and then Doan looks away wistfully. It's just this thing that we kind of all piece together, because the specifics of his backstory don't matter as much as what he is doing in the present, right?
Yeah.
And it clearly... Amuro doesn't need Doan to say those things, because Amuro's lived it, right? Amuro's killed people too, and at this point he's already killed people accidentally, and he's going to go kill more people, and that guilt accumulates, and Doan has chosen to deal with that by adopting these war orphans, and maybe they're orphans of his own making, maybe they're not, it doesn't particularly matter. It is the good he can do in the world. And then there is this additional level that the movie gives us of that this is a Zeon outpost, and he's intentionally playing Zeon against themselves, basically, by being there. And he's keeping them away by making them kind of think he's on their side, but he is there working on the nukes to disarm them. So there's sort of a couple of levels. He is like effectively trying to reclaim the island from Zeon by being there, and disarm these weapons. And I think that whole side of it is also really cool.
Yeah, and that adds, again, to that element of kind of like mystery that helps keep the plot more propulsive, because, it's a very small scale story overall, and there's not like a lot of real like plot in the movie. So them adding in that, this is another thing that was in one of those interviews you shared with me, is like adding in that element of the nukes was a good way of like keeping the like of explaining, one, like, why are they so insistently staying on this island if people keep on showing up with mobile suits and Cucuruz Doan has to fight them barehanded, which is like, that is a good point. Like, you do need to have like a reason. You can get away with it for a 20-minute TV episode. It doesn't pass muster if it's a 90-minute movie. You would eventually be like, why haven't you just like taken all the kids and left at some point? But also it gives this sort of bigger mystery you can follow with Doan of like, what is he doing? What is this like weird base? What are these like? What is it that he is working on throughout the movie? And it being revealed. I think they give you a lot of clues to piece it together fairly early on. But that moment at the end where all the nukes go flying up and they just blow up on their own, I was like legitimately surprised that was how that resolved, because I thought
too. For
sure, oh, they're going to replicate the iconic Odessa moment, but do it here. Where Amuro has to cut the nuke or like one of the nukes or something and do that whole thing.
He has to cut the nuke on the dotted line, as the diagram shows, yes.
And instead, I love that it's like, no, like, that's Doan's shit and he fucking took care of it. And that's like, and that is why he's here, that is what he's trying to do. And like, that's the moment where I think any kind of suspicions or anything of Doan are like fully dispersed, and you know who he is in his heart, like who he is deep down by that moment when all the nukes explode. And it's like I think that's the most probably like large, really notably dramatically different plot element that they added in, is that whole dynamic with the nukes, which adds a lot to the movie. And I think that the entire construction of it is very artful, and how it dovetails with all this kind of stuff they're adapting from the original premise of the episode.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. When I watched this movie the first time, I wasn't paying attention to like how long I'd been watching it. So, because if I had looked at how much time was left, there's not enough time for a big action sequence with the nukes, right? But I didn't know that, so I'm watching the movie, and the nukes go flying, and I'm like, oh, so, because the nukes thing does not happen in the manga for the Odessa Day. It's a different kind of final confrontation. And of course, it doesn't happen in the movies. So I'm like, is Yasuhiko finally going to get to do the big Amuro cuts the nuke on the dotted line sequence again? And instead, they just blow up, and it's so much better because it intentionally undermines what could be a bigger climax, which makes the themes of the movie much more potent. But then you get just, you know, a beautiful moment of visuals and, I think, visual metaphor of the nukes become fireworks, essentially. That the kids, there's this great shot. It starts with, it's Kika in the middle of the frame, and she, you know, throws her hand and is like, look up there. And then all the kids kind of come into the frame together. It's a beautiful piece of staging. I loved looking at it in the storyboards even, because he draws very, like, precisely, here's the moment with Kika, and then the kids coming in and all of this, because it's like a very well-designed moment of the nukes go from this thing that could have destroyed the world to it's this moment of wonder for the kids, and that is what Doan is creating, right? He is protecting them from he's like building, you know, skills and a personality that will allow them to survive beyond him, but he is also turning the darkness of this world into something that, you know, he can make positive for these children, and that is his heroism. And what's amazing is that if we are expecting Amuro to go cut on the dotted line and destroy the nukes, what Doan has done is even more heroic, and it's something we wouldn't have thought of, something Amuro wouldn't have thought of, because it's beyond the bounds of the story we thought we were in, and that's what makes it so powerful.
Yeah, it's a really perfect example of a defectively used anticlimax. You know, like, we typically use the term anticlimax as a negative thing, but it doesn't have to be. It's a more, like, technical term of how you can manage the climactic moments of your story. And this is like a really good example of, like, sometimes going for something that is smaller scale and does not lead to the big dramatic sequence can be better if it is what your story is kind of demanding. And it demonstrates, like, how thorough, like, Yoshikazu's sort of grasp is, Yoshikazu Yasuhiko's grasp is on the story that he's trying to tell with this movie, that they went in that direction. Because there must have been someone along that line. There had to have been someone looking at the movie who said, you got to put an action scene in there. Like, I can't imagine this movie going through without someone being like, come on, you got to do the nuke thing? Come on. And then being like, no, fuck that. Like, this is what happens. Yeah, it's great.
It's fantastic. Talking about the action more generally, let's just talk about how they do all of that. I do like the element that they've built in here of kind of fleshing out, even if Doan doesn't give it to us, we get a little bit of it of Doan's backstory, that he led this, like, elite team, the Southern Cross, and we get those characters. We get their cool sort of brown versions of what the Black Tri-Stars have. They're these high mobility versions of the Zaku, and or the Rikdom, and they look really, really cool. And I like those. There's a little bit. This movie does not do what the TV episode did, where Doan is a master of mobile suit martial arts. The line that kind of lands with a thud in original Gundam, but would go on to inspire the world of G Gundam, and God bless it for us. But yes, we do not get mobile suit martial arts in this movie. That would be a little out of place. But instead, they sort of suggest that Doan was an ace, basically. He was a, you know, really, like, powerful, feared pilot. There's the one sort of fanboy on the Southern Cross group who was excited to fight him and all of that stuff. And he's extremely capable, as we see, as he takes out most of them in his shitty beat-up Zaku, which is a fucking great design. If you haven't seen the episode in a while, one of the problems with that episode is the Zakus all look weirdly tall and gangly, and I like that instead here we have a Zaku that A, looks correct, and B, is all, like, beat up, and there's, like, pieces that are kind of missing off it. The paint is chipped because he's been using it for a while. I love Doan Zaku in this movie. It looks great.
Yeah, and just like the action in general is really, really, really impressive. Like it's very much like they do the mobile suit stuff broadly in the style of the origin OVAs. You know, it's like all CG and that kind of stuff, but it is like suitably advanced from that. And it very much has an old school Gundam aesthetic in like to style to the choreography, where it's really about a small handful of moves, and that is what constitutes a fight. It's not like here's a bunch of crazy beam clashes and stuff like that. It is, you know, I mean, a lot of fights end in one maneuver, or it's like a tiny handful. I think the most is you just get a couple more with Doan in some of his fights, but that's mostly because they're just using that to intercut with what Amuro is doing. And then as soon as it focuses on, okay, then now we're actually going to look at Doan fighting one of these guys, it's like 2 or 3 moves and the fight is over. And I think that is like my preferred version of mobile suit combat in general. Is I like the sense of weight and the finality and the intentionality to it, and it's very much what original Mobile Suit Gundam did. And there are definitely some even like specific references to things like you noted, him activating the beam saber and disintegrating the cockpit, which is a classic kind of Amuro move. I really like at the beginning of the movie. I feel like there's a little bit of a kind of callback to the Ramba Rao fight, where from the anime, where Amuro discards the shield and does like the 2-handed stance with the beam saber on this kind of like a kendo looking stance that is very cool.
He starts that fight by just tossing his gun into the ocean, which is such a, like, Amuro just is so... He loves tossing things away when he doesn't need them. And probably causes a headache for someone else on White Base, but Amuro throws shit all the time.
Yeah, there's definitely, like, whoever's in charge of armaments for the mobile suits at the White Base is just like, you motherfucker. Like, you gotta... There's, like, a fucking thing that you could just attach it. Like, you could just put it on the back. Like, it's got... It's not like we didn't think of the fact that you gotta put the beam rifle somewhere sometimes. Just fucking stow it away, man. Don't just chuck it into the goddamn ocean.
Yes, that's the post-credit scene of this movie, is someone from White Base having to go swim out there and find the gun.
Yeah, but so that style of the action I think is phenomenal. And then there's just like some amazing hero shots. I think the whole sequence where Doan has been beaten and it's at the bottom of that crater, and then Amuro is the best use of the Vulcan guns on the head of a mobile suit ever. Is Amuro like peppering that dude with his Vulcan guns just to get him to turn around. You have that amazing shot of the Gundam, and this is where it uses I believe it's the like Gundam theme and instrumental version of the original show's theme song, Toby Gundam.
Well, but it starts with the da 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 da.
Yes,
da. It's Gundam Stands Its Ground, which is it's used as the next episode preview, but it starts with the big horn lick, and they do a big movie hero version of it. It's a fucking great track.
Yeah, and then he slowly starts walking down the crater and then takes out the 2 beam sabers and activates them, but like one before the other, and it's just like so satisfying. It feels like the 3D animators spent a lot of time on those shots, just making them, the rhythm of them is so perfect, and the sense of weight of the mobile suits is so perfect. But I love that like the last fight of this movie is just Amuro figures out like, let's just get this guy up on the cliffside, and then he's completely fucked. He can't do anything. And it shows, like, Amuro's very tactical in the way that he fights, and he sees this guy's in this high mobility version of Izaku. He tries to spin around. He's very, like, laterally mobile. Get him on a cliff edge, and you cut off that entire ability. He's got effectively no ranged weapons, and Amuro just kicks his ass. And it's, like, a couple minutes. Like, it's not a big, crazy, huge sequence or anything. It's just very thoughtfully constructed and choreographed and animated. And that to me, that's like the real good shit. That's what you really want.
Yeah, and I love how that one happens, because he gets him up on the cliff, and this is the other great use of the Vulcan gun in the movie. He uses the Vulcan gun to, like, get him off balance a little bit, and then he goes in for the kill and, like, just cuts him up and throws him off, and he blows up. It's really good. You know, and I was actually kind of curious when I looked through the storyboards if all the action would sort of be in the storyboards drawn by Yasuhiko, because sometimes now, if you've got big CG action, it's not going to be all one thing one person drew in the boards, right? Yeah. And there are a couple of moments in the action where there's been a supplement that, like, someone has thrown on the side of the board and, like, thrown in, oh, we're going to need this shot here. But mostly it is just Yasuhiko continuing through, and it's drawn, and it's the exact choreography you get in the finished movie, just drawn by hand. So it's there from the inception stage with the storyboards, and it's just, and it's very clear there as well, the choreography. It's all about these specific big moves. And yeah, it's done very well. This is like kind of the highest point we've gotten of the MS Igloo tradition of the CGI mobile suits, where you start in MS Igloo, and then Mobile Suit Gundam, the Origin, picks that up and I think does it a step better, because the main animation director of the Origin is the Igloo guy, right?
Yes.
And yes. And then now you get that here, and I think this is the best version of it so far. There's a little wonkiness here and there about, like, I think kind of like the edges of the mobile suits versus the animation, because they do cell shade it and add hand animation on to make them look like they're of a piece of the world, and there's a little bit of inevitable wonkiness here and there, but largely it's done really beautifully. I think the best version of this is still how Hathaway handled all of it, but in terms of the more MS Igloo style tradition, this is really good and makes me happy that we've kind of been on this path, because I think it's a cool way to integrate it all.
Yeah, and I don't think the Hathaway style would have necessarily worked for this movie, because like Hathaway style demands like a certain amount of kineticism that would be inappropriate here. And I think like the more like staid classical framing of the action here wouldn't necessarily work if you're trying to do it with all the techniques that they use for Hathaway. Yeah, because like you saying that, Yasuhiko, Yoshikazu Yasuhiko even storyboarded those action moments does make a lot of sense to me, because they are very manga-esque, right? Yeah. Because that is how manga always does action effectively, because it is the only way that manga can do action, is a handful of big moves. You can't do filler, because like what's the point? Like you're having to draw it anyways. It's just as hard to draw filler as it is to draw an intentional thing. So yeah, it makes sense to me that is all storyboarded directly from him. That's cool.
Yeah, you can tell in the storyboards, I mean, you can tell what's him because he has such a distinctive style, but what's funny is he did all of his storyboards just completely by hand, pencil. Like, there's not even, he doesn't even use a shading pencil. It's just one pencil, and then all of the notes on the side, the dialogue is just handwritten. And then the couple of, Imga, he did 2 big scenes in the movie storyboarded, and her stuff is much more, some of it's by hand, but, like, there's a lot of digital augmentation, and there is, like, all of her notes are typed in there, and it is kind of funny. You get to like she did the dinner scene early in the movie where Amuro comes back and it ends with them all doing their kind of like pinky swear in the air. That's one of her scenes. And then I think it's the scene with Makuve in the middle of the movie is also her, but she did those 2 scenes, and she has a very different drawing style, and like I said, some of it is done like on the computer, but yeah, Yasuhiko's is, as you would probably expect, just completely old school by hand pencil, and all the action is his stuff. He did that, and it's just pencil drawings, and yeah, it's cool.
Very, very cool.
See, this is why I spent $180 on the fucking...
Yes, very good. We got to mention it as much as we can on the podcast.
I know.
So you can get all
my money's worth. Yeah, so I can use it as a tax write-off, right?
Yeah.
No, I don't think I would want to do that as a tax write-off, because I wouldn't want to try to explain it to the IRS in case they asked.
It would be a very complicated conversation.
I'd have to start, look, in 1979 there was this thing called Mobile Suit Gundam. But anyway, my dog is stretching out on the bed and making noises. It's funny. Anyway, all right. Where were we with? So we're talking about all the action. The action's great, even if it's not the focus of the movie. I do just generally love the way the mobile suits look in the Origin design. Like, the Gundam itself just looks so fucking good here, Sean.
Yeah, it's got all the little, like, fiddly bits and stuff like that. It looks like, when someone makes a perfect grade version of the original Gundam and puts every single seal and sticker and all that stuff on it.
Yeah.
But it works well. It's the kind of thing where it's like you could only make this design look like this if you were doing a 3D CG model, right?
Yeah.
It would be ridiculous to try to do this with classical animation. And yeah, it looks great. It works really well. It is good. It is very much of a piece with how it looks in the Origin manga and the OVAs, and it's awesome. But
we don't really see it in the OVAs outside of a couple of shots, like of the planning of it. So I feel like now this is the version of the Gundam that's kind of on par with like the version of Char's Zaku in that series, where we've gotten like the full modernized version of it, and it's great. It embraces the big bold colors. It's very, very good. Where else should we go with this? I think I want to spend some time on the ending of the movie, but I don't want to get there quite just yet. We mentioned earlier... Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, this might be where you were going to go also, is Captain Bright has a fair amount of stuff in this movie that we haven't really touched on. This is, I believe, the most we've gotten of Narita Ken's version of Bright, who he was recast for Unicorn, what is the first thing he did, I think. And that's probably also the other place where he has the most screen time. But there's like a good chunk of Captain Bright in this movie, honestly, more than I was even expecting, because he pops up throughout the film. And it's really nice because it is very much, I think, in line with obviously like the origin manga, but also just the original version of Bright from First Gundam, and there's like a lot of care taken to showing that he is a like this very high strung up dude who has like so much responsibility, so much is being asked of him. He is in no way, shape, or form prepared at the stage he is in his life to be in the position of authority he is in, and he is snapping at people constantly, and then he goes back to his room and he's like, oh god, oh, I shouldn't have said that, oh fuck, everything is going to hell and it's all going to be my fault, oh Jesus Christ. And I love that they really have like captured and even accentuated that dynamic that was in the anime, and it like enriches his relationship with Mirai, that they have a couple of scenes together. I just think like, you know, he's not the biggest character in the movie, but for where he shows up, it is such a good depiction of young Bright dealing with like all this horse shit he doesn't know what to do with.
Yeah, I'm really impressed by what Narita Ken has done with the role, because, you know, big fucking shoes to fill, right? It's one of the iconic voices of Gundam. With Unicorn, what kind of helped there is that he's playing an older version of Bright, beyond where, you know, we had seen Bright before. And so I think there was a little space for like reinvention and playing with the age of the character. He'll get to do that again when we get to him in the Hathaway movies, right? Yeah. But this is right, you know, smack dab in the middle of First Gundam. And so how do you do the character there? And part of it is just that it's very smartly written, but I think he really gets, you know, the voice. It's a really good impression of the original voice, but I think it also gets a lot of the sort of inherent humor and pathos. And then I just think Yasuhiko is really good at writing this character. I love the version of Bright in the manga. You know, Bright in the manga is slightly more comical in that his exaggerations are more or his expressions are more exaggerated in the manga than you typically get in the anime. But it's and part of that is just because you don't have a voice. It's on the page. It's a manga, so they play with it a little bit more. But you get that here, and you get some, you know, you get the scene of him kind of snapping at Amuro early in the movie. And then I think, God, this was the scene when I knew we were in for something special watching this movie, is when he's back in his quarters and Mirai comes in. And it's just such a, it's him going, man, I shouldn't have pushed him that far. And Mirai's like, he's a delicate kid, you know. And then Bright has that thought to himself of like, man, I wish he had just deserted, you know, like, just like, because he doesn't want to put Amuro through this, right? And so that's a fantastic, fantastic scene. And then you get just some of the best Captain Bright comedy ever later in the movie, when he is intentionally buying time for everyone to go do the mission, and he's on the horn with the commander who's telling him to go to Belfast, and he just starts inventing on the phone all these different problems, and he's picking up the different receivers on his captain's chair, and he's like, hey, is that part fixed yet? No? Oh, man, we're not going to be able to take off. It's one of the funniest Captain Bright scenes ever.
Yeah, and it's great because, you know, it gives Captain Bright has a little character arc over this, right? And it's really well delivered, because you've got a couple of scenes on the white base where Slugger comes back and hears that it's like, what? We're just going to, like, one, he was out drinking with the other guys who aren't in here, but there's like a cast of additional characters in the manga that are like the other members of his squad that also joined the white base. And so he's out drinking with them, comes back after all the shit has happened and Amuro has been left behind on this island. And then he has this thing with Kai where he says, you know, have you ever thought what it would be like to like face a court martial? And Kai's like, and then it cuts. And so you get a couple of moments like that, and you get some like jokes with Sayla and stuff, but you think, you know, it's intentionally set up for your expectation to be that they're doing this without Bright's approval. And they're going to do the thing that everybody always does, which is they steal a mobile suit or whatever, and they go fucking leave the hangar. A thing that is clearly trivially easy to do in the Gundam universe, that someone just like, you know, the Universal Century is a lot like our world in the future, except for we never invented a lock. Locks were never invented. It never happened. Nobody had the idea of like keys and locks, and so it's just like, how can you possibly keep people, like prevent someone from just opening up the hangar doors and stealing your fucking mobile suits? It cannot be done. So you're expecting it just to be that, and Bright to be like, what do you mean the G Savior launched, or whatever, or what do you mean the core fighter has just launched? What do you mean the giant gun tank? What's happening? God! But then actually he is in on it. Like, I think that is such a good way to sort of spruce up that side of the movie when you need the rest of the white base people to be coming for Amuro. It gives Bright a character arc. It's presented in a dramatic way that is really like interesting and with some good reveals. Then, as you say, it's with a very good like comic routine of Bright just being like, the gyroscope is broken, you gotta get on that. What do you mean the speedometer's not operating? Oh, well, we're definitely not going to be able to get there. And him doing that. The whole bit is really effective and just uses the existing cast of the white base characters kind of like optimally for this movie that doesn't necessarily feature them super heavily.
Yeah. Well, it even pays attention to, like, he has a couple of encounters with the guy on the screen, the, like, random kind of beleaguered. It's someone who is higher up in the ranks than Bright, but is also, like, very clearly beleaguered and put on. And he's like, at the beginning, he's like, go to Alagranza, go to this island. And then later he's like, you don't have to be on the island anymore. You're going to go to Belfast. And then finally, Bright is getting jerked around so much, he clearly has fun putting the screws to this guy. And that guy knows Bright is putting the screws to him, but he can't do anything about it. It's very funny. Yeah. No, Captain Bright, love him. Sayla has a couple of good moments. Not a huge character in this, but I, always love seeing Sayla. I particularly like how Yasuhiko draws Sayla in the origin, and we get that here. She's awesome.
Meg Mihan's performance as Sayla is so fucking perfect. Like, it's one of those where, because this is like Sayla. This is First Gundam era Sayla. And it's like, that's the one that to me is like eerie, like the way that she plays the character, where it's not necessarily an impression of the original voice actress, but she so fully invokes the character, especially because we've seen her play the character like along that kind of developmental path over the course of the origin, that like getting to hear, it's like, yeah, you could just do a Sayla TV show and just have Meg Mihan just play Sayla, and I was going to sit down for it.
I was going to say, it's not obvious to me where you would ever do more stuff in kind of the era of First Gundam again, other than if they want to do a mini-series with Sayla, I would watch the shit out of that. And there's a lot of open space to do it. Just have, like, during Zeta, what was Sayla up to? I would watch that. They should do that.
Yes, it's like Obi-Wan Kenobi, but for Sayla.
Sayla Mass.
Give me the show. It's a six-part miniseries, Sayla Mass.
Yep, it could be great. Why not? Anyway, I'd be down for it. I love that. We get some good Kika Cats and Let's action. I'm not entirely sure why they bring Kika Cats and Let's on the Gunperry to the island. That seems like a stupid and dangerous thing to do. But, it turns out all the war orphans get to have fun together, and we get the big moment with the goat running into Kai. That's fucking great.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's in a narrative sense, it's there in order to sort of, like, have the contrast of remind you that, like, Amuro comes from a community like this in many ways.
Yes.
And it's effective in that sense. But yes, there is a logical beat left there of like, but do they need to actually come on the mission to go get Amuro? But yes, because they're cute, and that is the answer.
Man, and I just love there is like during the climax of this movie, the big like Doan is fighting all the mobile suits and Amuro is squishing a dude with his Gundam foot. There is the scene where the goat gets away and goes and runs into Hayato and Kai, and they do the like very 70s anime thing where it's just a still frame of the goat like knocking into Kai and like kicking its ass, and the screen like shakes with the image.
Yeah, I thought that was... the background is just like this like mess of kind of gradiented colors of kind of reds and purples, and it's all very exaggerated. Yeah, that's very funny.
I had a lot of fun looking at that in the storyboards, because I realized I never knew how do you indicate that in storyboards, and the way he indicates it is he draws basically what the image is, and then in the notes has this picture where he just draws one rectangle and then another rectangle at like an angle, and then draws an arrow like we're going to do the thing, and it's very funny. You just see that on there, and it's just you have the 3 frames of it hitting Hayato, hitting Kai, and then I think it hits Kai again. Basically is what you get, and they're very funny.
Yeah, and I think the best part of that is the build up to that moment of where the goat has run away, and the little Studio Ghibli boy with the glasses, he's
such a Studio Ghibli boy. It's so funny.
Yeah, it's just little Ghibli boy. He's like, because all the other characters look like Yoshikazu Yasuhiko characters, and then there's just Ghibli boy here too. Who takes care of the Ghibli goat. But the goat runs away. And then Kai, you get this like shot from Kai's POV looking up from the ground, and the goat is just sort of gesticulating madly in the air as it's like prancing towards Kai. He's like, what the fuck is this thing? And it reminded me of in the manga and stuff with the origins, little girl Sayla with her like really goofy cartoon horse that for no reason just has this ridiculous fucking Looney Tunes horse. It's like a lot like that. It's like Yoshikazu Yasuhiko definitely has this very childish part to his humor that he indulges sometimes that I think is delightful. And all the goat humor in the movie worked for me a lot.
Because we didn't get that in the OVA. They don't really adapt Sayla's crazy horse, and I was sad about that. There's also more stuff with her cat in the manga. We get a little bit of that in the OVA. But I like that this movie just dedicates a fair amount of screen time to goat antics. And you've even got, you know, Takayuki Hattori's music has this great little theme for the kids. It's the da 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 da, and it's like the theme. And I love that just comes in the climax when they're hanging around with the goat. I love it. The Studio Ghibli boy, it's not just that he looks like a Studio Ghibli boy, he's voiced like a Studio Ghibli boy. It's just a kid doing not giving a performance really, but just a kid talking, which is a very much like how Miyazaki will always direct kids in his movies, right? It is very funny. There's just a Studio Ghibli boy hanging around. No, but I love it. I love the kids in this movie generally. I think it's a very endearing group of war orphans. You know, Gundam, it's a series that has had many, many war orphans. I'm surprised no one asked us to rank the war orphans. Let's find every war. It would be the entire cast of Iron-Blooded Orphans, the 3 from Mobile Suit Gundam. We'd have to add in all the kids from this, rank all the war orphans.
Here's my ranking. Kika is number 1.
Kika's number 1. Yeah.
That's Kika's number 1. Everyone comes after Kika.
Yeah. Kika's number 1. Maybe, I was going to say maybe Mikazuki at number 2. Very different characters.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. Kika should get a miniseries too. I want to see what Kika does as an adult.
No, because she's gonna get killed in a crazy war. I want her as a little kid going on crazy fun adventures. Don't show me growing up Kika. I don't want to see what happens to her. Nothing happens. Nobody lives to an old age of Universal Century. You know, it's like everyone gets killed in some crazy war.
Yeah. Anyway, I that's true, because if you go far enough, then it's just her reacting to the death of cats, and you know, it's sad. Anyway, love all of that stuff. Speaking of the music, this movie, the score is phenomenal. I love what Hattori did for this. It's a great soundtrack. I put the CD in my Blu-ray player so I could listen to it on my nice soundbar this morning, and that's when I was just perusing the storyboard book and listening to the score. And I've seen the movie twice, so I've heard this music a lot. I think the big moments where he brings in classic themes from Gundam are great, and there's even a couple of, I feel like, deeper cuts in there beyond just there's the instrumental version of Tobei Gundam. There's Gundam Stands Its Ground, but there's also a theme. It's I forget the actual name of it, but it's M45 from the movies, which is the one that starts with the drums and gets bigger and bigger. That one's great. That's from movie 3, I think, that they use in here when everyone is getting ready to go, and it's the same scene where Bright is doing the comedy bit with the captain. All of that's great, but I think the original music for the movie is great too. There's a lot of fun instrumentation that kind of harkens back to original Gundam in that it just uses a lot of instruments. So there's shredding guitar, but there's also saxophone in places. There's some weird winds. It's just a very eclectic score that I think befits what the movie is.
Yeah, I agree that I felt like all the original music fits in very nicely with the texture of the existing material that he sort of updates and does new versions of a lot of the classic music. And I think across the board, it's really great. It's a thing where I think, he did a really good job on the origin OVAs, particularly with the main Shore theme and the variations thereof. But I think this, particularly because it's a movie, so it gets to be more concentrated, I think this is an even more impressive soundtrack to me. It's really great.
No, I totally agree on that. And I do have a funny story for you, Sean. I know you know this composer's work because he did the Godzilla Millennium movies, most of them. And so as I said, the box set I have of this movie has the soundtrack CD, and you can get the soundtrack on Spotify already and everything, but I decided I wanted to rip the soundtrack, so I had it, a nice rip of it in my library. And so I ripped it into iTunes, and then I told it to grab the album art, and it grabbed, for whatever reason, I had it titled as Cucuruz Doan's Island, but it grabbed the album art for Godzilla 2000. And it was very funny. I just had it in my library for a couple of minutes while I went and found better album art of Godzilla 2000, but for the Gundam Cucuruz Doan's Island soundtrack.
It's Godzilla 2000. That soundtrack. It's not the best Gundam or Godzilla soundtrack, but it's not shabby.
No, but yes. Anyway, so funny anecdote there. Do you want to talk about the ending of this fucking movie? A couple of ways to approach this, but. So the moment that it repeats most verbatim, and obviously it's done much better in terms of animation and everything, is Amuro's final line to Doan and then throwing the mobile suit in the water. And the line as it's translated in the subtitles is, "It's the smell of war lingering on your body that draws battle to you. Let me get rid of it for you, Doan." And I transcribed this in Japanese too, because I think it's such a great line. Maybe I can give it to you in the chat, Sean, and you can do it for us. But I think it's a really striking just kind of use of verbiage. I love the phrase shimitsuku, which he uses there, which is they translate it as, it's the smell of war lingering on your body. The dictionary definition is to be indelibly stained or ingrained, to be dyed in deeply. I love that idea of let me get rid of this thing that is indelibly stained on you, Doan. And I think Tōru Furuya's delivery of that line is fucking gorgeous.
Yeah, so you gave me the line, so I'll read the line in Japanese. It's Cucuruz Doan. あなたの体に染みついている戦争の匂いが戦いを引き寄せるんじゃないでしょうか。それを消させてください。Doan. So as you're saying, like it means, so shimitsuiteru means like it has been dyed in. So it's like into your body, like the stench of war is dyed in there, and that is drawing in and bringing battle to you. Let me erase that for you. And by doing so, in order to do so, he picks up the Zaku, and I love how much time they spend on this moment, which again is from the original episode of the Gundam lifting the Zaku up like on two hands over its head, which when you have like in a thing that uses the sense of scale through animation of mobile suits properly, which is not what the original Doan animation was like the weight and like the enormity of what is happening really comes across on screen. How immense and huge these things are, and him just throwing the Zaku over the edge into the water. It's an incredible image that is like, I don't think you realize how much of a difference you can make for like it translating that kind of image with everything that they do to it to just make it really come across as like this revelatory, I think, kind of thing for the end of this movie.
I actually wrote a note for myself on this for my dissertation because I might use this as a good example. I mean, it's a particularly poor piece of animation in the original episode, but in the original episode, the problem with that scene is that there's no weight to it at all. Like, he basically picks up the Zaku like it's a fucking, like, ball and just chucks it, and it's ridiculous. And they don't really get the sense of scale because everything's weirdly tall in that episode, and it just doesn't quite land. And I think partly because they're using CGI for that moment, and they're really able to, like, there's like parts falling off of it and all this stuff, and the sound design, we gotta talk about the sound design in this movie too because it's fucking great, but the sound design of like all the like creaking of it, and then they do this slow motion when he throws it, and that's even, I love that it's in the storyboards, it just says in katakana suro, like slow this one down, and he tosses it over, and it's lovely. And I think, from that line of Amuro to then doing it and the weight of it, he's giving Doan this amazing gift he can't give himself. And I think the moment that maybe makes it for me is right before Amuro steps in and says this to Doan. Doan is talking to the kids, and there's a couple cutaways to Amuro looking at them and thinking. And it's such good animation because you see Amuro realizing what he needs to do and what he can't do, which is just go join them, you know? And I think that's what sells the line so much, is all the added context, but also just that immediate moment of, it's, in the original episode, it's something Amuro just comes up and says, but I think that build up to it comes so deeply from inside Amuro, and I think Furuya sells that in his performance of, as much as he is one with the Gundam, there is also this desire for him to do that to the Gundam itself,
Yeah. And there's something about just using the line effectively verbatim from the original show, is that like the dialogue of original Gundam was more stylized, as like a 70s piece of anime than a lot of the dialogue in this movie. And so like the way he says it, like it's so metaphorical and stylistic, and Amuro doesn't speak that way anywhere else over the course of this film. And there's something about it where it feels so much of him stepping fully into the role of the hero, which is what he is. And he becomes this more like traditionally, classically heroic figure, and also in a kind of self-sacrificial way, but self-sacrificial in a kind of counterintuitive way, right? Where he is committing self-sacrifice by not sacrificing himself, if that makes sense. Because he's not getting rid of his own Gundam. He's not getting rid of anything that he has. He is getting rid of the thing that Doan has, but that means that Amuro must continue this fight. And that is what is heroic about it. And yeah, it is a really powerful moment because you feel how much the whole movie feels designed to bring Amuro and the characters and the whole world to the point where you can give this line and do this thing and have it have the weight that it needs to have, instead of like the kind of weightlessness, both literally and metaphorically, that it had in the original episode.
Yeah. It's a stunning moment, and then the actual ending of the movie is the white base flyover of the island to the tune of Hiroko Moriguchi's new song for Gundam, Ubugoe, which, I put on my top 40. It's one of the best Gundam songs ever written and recorded. It's utterly phenomenal, and there is something about that imagery of the white base flying over and saying goodbye, and this little bit of good it's concretely left in the world under it, and off to face the rest of its adventures. There's something about that just felt like, oh, this is everyone involved kind of saying goodbye to Gundam for now.
Yeah, and in the one of the interviews that you shared with me, like, this is a thing that Yoshikazu Yasuhiko says, is that, like, they asked him, the question was about the ending, and he said specifically, like, that was one of the first things he had in his head was like, the last thing has to be the white base flying over the island and Amuro looking at it wistfully. And that's like that. He knew that was going to be the last image of the movie immediately. And you feel it, that it is the perfect end point because it contains everything of the movie, and of Amuro's journey and how he has, like, learned and grown, but he still has his whole adventure, like the rest of Gundam, still lies ahead of him,
Yeah. It's stunning. And that moment you talked about of Amuro looking back wistfully, that's the other thing that makes it. And it's there, like I said, the remarkable thing about looking at Yasuhiko's storyboards is how much of the final drawing of the characters is just so there in the boards themselves, of, like, he gets the expression so completely, and you look at him, he's in his uniform, which he isn't in for most of the movie, and he's looking out at, the island, and it's this look on his face that is kind of hard to read, but says a lot of different things. And it's, it's beautiful. And how about that fucking song, Sean?
Yeah, Ubugoe is amazing. So, like, the title of the song, it means it's like the first cry of a baby after it's been born. And that's very much what, like, the lyrics are.
Kind of hard to translate poetically, right?
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's just like, it's the thing that, like, a word that we don't have a word for that in English. So it's like, you can't translate the title directly. But yes, no, like, I mean, it's Hiroko Moriguchi singing. Her voice is just so incredible. And yeah, this song is amazing. In particular, the moment, it's like about 90 seconds or about 100 seconds into the song where the drums and the bass kick in is just like, it is a perfect moment of music.
Yes.
It's like you have, because it starts much more slower and kind of contemplative and very much with piano and accentuating Hiroko Moriguchi's vocals. And then when, like, the rest of the band comes in, is when you're just like, oh my god, this, because it's not just a great song, it's a great groove. It's got that kind of, it got a little bit of funky quality to the way it's put together, which I think is intentional to get some of that First Gundam feel to it. It's also very stylistically similar to how her Gundam song cover songs are put together. There's not much sort of, like, electronic elements to it or anything. It feels like it is a live band effectively playing the song. And there's just a very organic quality of the music that you get from that. Very sparse, focused, very live feeling instrumentation, that this is a perfect example of.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite, of those big kind of rock ballads that she's done for Gundam. I adore it. I've listened to it many times since I saw the movie. And I even... More money I've spent on this fucking movie. I did get the CD single from Japan, and I got it specifically, like, on its... I don't go around buying up a lot of CD singles, but I got it because I couldn't find a torrent of it, and it comes with... It's the song and then 2 more Gundam song covers she hasn't released elsewhere, and it's her covers of Now Is Good Night, which is the insert song you get at several points in First Gundam, including that's what plays in the show version when Lala dies.
Yeah.
And then also of Forever Amuro, the end credits song. And I shared those with you. Have you listened to those covers yet, Sean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Jesus fucking Christ, they're good.
It's really good. She should make a Gundam song covers for.
She should just never stop. They're all amazing. Yeah. Like, honestly, her version of Now Is Good Night is so good, I want to, like, edit it into First Gundam. Like, it's it's a better version of that song, you know?
Yeah, because there have been a couple of songs with, like, some of the deeper cuts that really has that quality of, like, this is, like, a decent song in the original, and now you've turned it into, like, an amazing song. Like, Silver Dress is a lot like that from Zeta Gundam. Yeah, there's just some of those where you're like, goddamn, her and, like, the other musicians that she works with are so good. It's amazing.
Yeah, that one, and then the cover of Forever Amuro is a big choral cover, kind of like the one of Beginning she did. Yeah, with Voja, and it's so fun. It's such a good one. Yeah, and then also that one has another Yasuhiko original illustration, which made me want to get it because it's just a beautiful drawing of the white base flying over the lighthouse and a very wistful looking Amuro looking down at them. So anyway. That was fun to have as well. It also had a Blu-ray with it that has the music video for Ubugoe, which you can see on YouTube. It's actually a pretty cool music video, and a like 40-minute making of documentary, which I have not watched in full, but it's kind of fun because it's Moriguchi like walking into these cool rooms, and there's a part they did on like a cliff outside to kind of like evoke the movie, and it's just fun.
Yeah, because Shihiro Moriguchi has been, like, hosted a bunch of, like, music-focused TV shows and stuff like that in Japan, so she's just a very fun person also to watch and, like, see interviews of and stuff, just because she's, like, developed a really good on-camera kind of, like, personality and stuff. Yeah, she's awesome. Yeah,
and honestly, when I saw this movie the first time, Sean, I had missed the news that Moriguchi had a song in it somehow, and so you get to the end and I realize it's her and it's a new Moriguchi song, and it's like, what a perfect cherry on top of this movie that it's another piece of First Gundam with Tōru Furuya as Amuro. It's Yoshikazu Yasuhiko doing the whole thing. It's all of these, like, just accumulating all these things I love and hold dear in Gundam and in, you know, just life. And then you top it off with a new Moriguchi original Gundam song. I feel like I'm being spoiled by this movie, Sean.
Yeah, and it's really nice to get this, you know, I like it when the movies end with an original song composed specifically for the movie rather than like what you sometimes will get, and you can get really good songs and it can be used really well still, but oftentimes you will, you know, have someone has signed the new single of some hot J-rock band or something like that, which can be cool. But I always prefer if you can build something that's really thematically in tune with the movie because it was written specifically for the film. You know, like obviously I think probably the biggest example of that recently is Homura at the end of the Kimetsu no Yaiba movie. But this has that similar quality of where the tone of it, the style of it, the lyrics, all of it is like very reflective of what the movie is doing. It's used very effectively as that lead into the end credits because it's, you know, it starts before the credits kick in. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah. It's a good example of the counter of that is like Dragon Ball has had 4 movies in this last decade. And they've done that thing where, like, none of them have had particularly great songs at the end because some of them are good, but it's just kind of you get a hot new J-rock artist in. And what I've always wanted is, like, why haven't they had Hironobu Kageyama come back and do a cool new Dragon Ball song, you know? Yeah. And that would be, like, my dream for one of these. And we haven't gotten that, but we did get it here for Gundam with Moriguchi coming back. So, all around, great movie. And speaking of the music, I do just also want to say, I don't know what has happened over at Sunrise with their sound design, but it is off the fucking charts good in this movie and in Hathaway last year. And, like, a clear jump up. Because, like, I recently rewatched Narrative Gundam 2, which would be the last movie before Hathaway. That's not that old. That's, like, 2019 or something, 2018. Good sound design. It's fine. But there's something that happened, like, after Iron Blooded Orphans and Build Divers and Narrative. Hathaway and this movie, I listened to Cucuruz Doan. I've seen it twice now, and I watched it once with my nice headphones, and I watched it once with my sound bar, and it just gave both of them such a workout. It's both of these movies, they mixed natively in Dolby Atmos, so maybe it's just more has had to go into it for that, but I think Hathaway even more so than this one, because Hathaway just has more going on in the mix, but like, this one, too, just has there's so much directionality to it. The sound effects are so meaty and crunchy, like all the stuff in the cockpit sounds so good. The mixing of the vocals and the music, it's just a A+ sound design for this movie. And same as Hathaway last year.
Yeah, 100% agree. It's because it gives you like a lot of really good dynamic range to all the sound effects and the music and all of that, but then also it does like the most important thing is finding a way to mix all of that really well and have it be very impactful, but then also not have it step on top of the dialogue. Like the dialogue is always very crisp. It's always very easy to understand. It's something you're never like kind of struggling to hear, which is that kind of like modern Hollywood issue you get sometimes. And yeah, it is, I'm with you 100%. Not quite as impressive as the Hathaway one, mostly because like the project doesn't demand it to be at what Hathaway's doing. But it is like amongst the best sound mixing I've heard, in like a modern movie.
It actually makes me really curious for Witch from Mercury, which is a TV project, so it won't be as ambitious on the sound. It'll be stereo, it won't be surround. Anime is, I've never heard of a TV anime mixed in surround. But just there's something about how Sunrise has like made this leap since they last made a TV show that I'm really curious if we get even more there. Makes me excited for Hathaway 2 and whatever else is coming. It's just good stuff. Like, honestly, this disc and Hathaway would be like two of my go-tos to show off a sound system. They're so good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Hathaway 100% in particular is that like check out my rig kind of movie.
Yes.
Like, look how awesome my screen is. Look at how like good my sound system is. It is one of those where you just, like, you put it in when you bought a new piece of kit and you want to like see how good it is now. Like, Hathaway is absolutely that kind of movie.
Yeah, I have the Blu-ray of Hathaway, and I think that would be like my maybe go-to Blu-ray demo disc. For 4K, I would do something else, but like as a standard Blu-ray, that the Kimetsu no Yaiba Blu-ray did of the movie Mugen Train was that way as well, for obvious reasons. But anyway, good stuff. Gundam is awesome. I loved this movie, Sean.
Yes. One thing that just popped into my head, because I had it in my head I wanted to mention because I found it very funny. This is not particularly incidental with this movie, but I found it absolutely hilarious that in Bright's office, he has on his fucking wall an image of the white base from the original show leaving Jaburo with the pelicans flying next to it. I don't know if you noticed that.
I didn't notice that. That's great.
Yeah, it's like it's framed on his wall, and it's like it's the first time it cuts into his office after they go on the mission, and it's when Mirai comes in and sort of admonishes him a bit for how strict he was. That with the cut there, the shot is like, it's not like zoomed in on that image, but that image is in the middle of the wall, and I literally stopped the movie and was like, wait a minute, is that the fucking white base leaving Jaburo? It's like, it is. Who took that picture? How did he get that picture? Because in this continuity, they would have left Jaburo at this point, so this has happened. And I love the idea that Bright, like, at Jaburo hired some guy to, like, go stand on that cliff over there with the camera, where, look, there's a pack of, like, flamingos right here. We're gonna fly out at sunset. You gotta take the picture and email it to me. It's gonna be fucking great. I'm gonna get it on my wall. It's gonna be amazing.
I like the idea. Maybe Bright had a friend back at Jaburo who just took the picture and was like, and then texted it to him. Like, Bright, you got to see this amazing picture of you guys. And he's like, great. Job John, get over here. You got to laminate this for me.
No, that's actually why they stopped in Dublin, was to get it framed. It's like they had nothing to do with any military operation. You know, it's just like, look, I know a guy who can do it real cheap, very quick. We're going to stop off in Dublin. I just got to get this framed on my wall. It's just, it's perfect.
Clearly, I think that has to be the plot of the next Gundam movie, is how Bright got that picture, because that is brain-breaking. I noticed in his office he has his, like, commission on the wall, and you can see, because it's very clear, the signature of Johann Ibrahim Revel they wrote out in full, and I loved that. I like the idea that General Revel signs his full fucking name. Makes sense to me, yeah. Anyway, this movie's great. I'm so excited to talk about all sorts of other anime with you, Sean, and of course we're going to talk about Gundam again in the not-too-distant future, but there is a little bit of sadness in me at this kind of being the end of the road with Gundam for the present moment.
Yes. Well, before we wrap this up, Jonathan, I just had the idea. I'm going to link it for you in the chat so you can bring it up. We just did our 3rd anniversary where we ranked all of the Gundams.
Okay, yeah.
And that is while this movie is coming out. We gotta update it. We gotta officially update the rankings, and figure out where does Mobile Suit Gundam Cucuruz Doan's Island fit now in our official Weekly Suit Gundam rankings, the ranking of Gundams. Or else it will bother me forever if it is not on this list.
No, I think you're right. I actually was going to do this. I had forgotten about this, so I'm glad you remembered. I wanted to do this today. I'm looking at it now. My initial impulse is I would put it at number 13, where Gundam Seed is right now, and I have it right under Hathaway's Flash. Maybe that's too high. That's my initial instinct.
It's very funny because my initial instinct was to put it right below Gundam Seed and right above Unicorn Gundam.
I'd be fine with that. I would put it above the Origin. I actually think this is better than the Origin.
Yes, I agree.
They're hard to compare. The Origin is 6 movies. This is 1 movie, but you know what
Yes, because I mean, for reference for people, this is out of it will now be a 34-item list, but out of the 34-item list, this would be our number 14, and Gundam Origin would then become number 16. So they would be both ranked very high.
Yeah.
I think that's a good spot for it.
Okay, so right under Gundam Seed?
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to put it there. All right, Sean, do you want to, as our final bit of Weekly Suit Gundam for the moment, list for everyone our final top 34, the complete Gundam rankings?
Yes, so this is for the end of the original era of Weekly Suit Gundam before it becomes a sort of sister show or whatever to Japanimation Station. This is, as of now, the official Weekly Suit Gundam rankings of rankings. Our number 34 is G Savior.
Our number 33 is Gundam Build Divers.
Our number 32 is the original MS Igloo.
Our number 31 is Mobile Suit Gundam Seed Destiny.
Our number 30 is Gundam Twilight Axis.
Our number 29 is New Mobile Report Gundam Wing.
Our number 28 is Gundam Build Fighters Try.
Number 27 is Gundam 83 Stardust Memory.
Our number 26 is the Zeta Gundam movie trilogy, the new translation.
Number 25 is Mobile Suit Gundam Thunderbolt.
Number 24 is Mobile Suit Gundam MS Igloo 2.
Number 23 is the movie Narrative Gundam.
Number 22 is Mobile Fighter G Gundam.
Number 21, After War Gundam X.
Number 20 is Gundam Build Divers Re-Rise.
Number 19 is Mobile Suit Gundam Age.
Number 18 is Mobile Suit Gundam F91.
Number 17 is Mobile Suit Gundam The 08th MS Team.
Number 16 is Mobile Suit Gundam The Origin, the OVA series.
Number 15 is Mobile Suit Gundam Unicorn, also an OVA series.
Yes. And our number 14, the brand new edition, is Mobile Suit Gundam Cucuruz Doan's Island. It's a little movie that could... This is the movie. This is not episode 15 of the show. This is the movie Cucuruz Doan's Island.
Yeah, we're going to rank all the episodes individually later. No. Number 13 is Mobile Suit Gundam Seed.
Number 12 is Mobile Suit Gundam Hathaway's Flash.
Number 11 is Mobile Suit Victory Gundam.
Number 10 is Mobile Suit Gundam Double Zeta.
Number 9 is Gundam 0080 War in the Pocket.
Number 8 is Mobile Suit Gundam Iron-Blooded Orphans.
Number 7 is Gundam Build Fighters.
Number 6 is Mobile Suit Gundam 00.
Number 5 is Gundam Reconquista in G.
Number 4 is Mobile Suit Gundam Char's Counterattack.
Number 3 is Mobile Suit Zeta Gundam.
Our number 2 is Turn A Gundam called Turn A Gundam.
And our number 1, eternally in our hearts, Mobile Suit Gundam.
君は生き延びることができるか